2025 COLA funding to providers expeditiously through fiscal year 2025 budget advances and will provide additional information through FAQs and other resources. We will continue to support the implementation of reforms such as these and other ongoing programs and initiatives in the face of these challenging fiscal times. MOX's total budget for FY24 is $44.6 million, including $21.2 million for personnel services and $23.4 million for OTPS. The bulk of our budget is devoted to Accenture and Ivalua contracts, which maintains Passport, the city's procurement and payment system, and are valued at $90 million over 10 years for Ivalua and nearly $45 million over 6 years for Accenture. In FY24, during our Accenture maintenance contract renewal, OMB instituted the 15% PEG, and MOX worked diligently to reduce that contract by $7.2 million over the 3-year lifespan of the contract, a total reduction of over 100,000 hours to meet our PEG. This fiscal year has been especially impactful because, along with the contract reduction in PEGs, MOX has been going through a transition. We completed a once-in-a-decade decommissioning and migration of over 1/3 of our portfolio of active contracts from our legacy system accelerator to Passport, and have begun a host of improvement and additional processes in Passport to better serve our users. In addition to the PEGs, $3.9 million in FY24 and $2.5 million in the out years, the city's prior year budget for budget and out years. Between our FY24 adopted and our upcoming FY25 budget, we will have lost 14 MOX direct budgeted positions, representing 8% of our total headcount. Along with previous structural deficit from prior year budget reductions, we continue to face headcount challenges, and as of June 3rd, 2024, MOX has 18 vacant positions. Turning to the 8 bills presented today, we have some questions and concerns regarding implementation and impact, particularly those requiring a cost commitment, some of which are inconsistent with existing programs or would impose additional burdens on providers. For Intro 243, 510, and 514, the administration cannot commit to legislation that would create an ongoing cost commitment in the present budget situation. Along with overlapping with the city's existing direct cost rate floor and reduce the amount the city can spend on direct services. Announced in October 2019 and claiming for indirect costs and funding opening in November 2019, the ICR funding initiative issues a standardized methodology for contractors to obtain a budgeted cost rate above 10% with the citywide implementation team and the HHS cost rate manual. Similarly, the cost component of Intro 510 and inconsistencies with existing programs also contribute to our concerns around implementation of this legislation. As we've previously testified, the administration has been committed to investing in the Returnable Grant Fund, which already offers interest-free loans to human service providers contracting with the city. In January 2024, the administration delivered on a key recommendation from the Joint Task Force to get nonprofits paid on time by expanding access to the RGF and streamlining the application to ensure that provider partners and of all sizes have access. In addition to this overlap, the bill would only apply to work, labor, or service contracts under $500,000 that are pending registration with the controller, which would limit eligibility as compared to the RGF. We also find Intro 514 to be both unachievable in this budgetary environment and contradict our ongoing efforts. In this instance, those around contract timeliness. Pursuant to PBB Rule 4-12, we provide summary data on the timeliness of agency contract submissions in the annual indicators report. In the FY23 report, we shared that the citywide chief procurement officer has not deemed any agency to be substantially late, but recognizes that there is still progress to be made. Although there is still much to do alongside the implementation of Passport Public, a public transparency portal that provides data on contract processing and retroactivity, these transparency tools are an important means to enforce accountability, with the ultimate goal of getting nonprofits paid on time. While we support the general goals evident in Intro 214, 510, and 514, we are seeing progress in the initiatives currently underway, and the administration cannot commit to any new legislation which would incur a fiscal impact in the current budgetary environment. For Intro 508, 801, 802, and 803, we have some questions and concerns around implementation and would appreciate further discussions with the Council. While late payments are a major pain point in city contracting with significant impact on vendors, we would caution that Intro 508 would only add additional layers of process and burden to an already fragmented system. Many payments are also deliverable-based, not time-based. Mandating a payment reporting system based solely on time does not take into account the breadth of procurement system and could lead to significant adverse consequences. While we're open to further discussion on Intro 801, we'd like to further detail from the Council as these detailed submissions described in the bill could have negative effects on contract timeliness by imposing additional burdens on the subcontractor approval process. For Intro 802 and 803, we would need further discussion with the Council on the goals of this legislation. As a general matter, we are wary of introducing additional barriers and process requirements which could further slow down and complicate city contracting, a historical issue that we are currently addressing through much of the reform work I mentioned at the beginning of my testimony. But we're happy to continue the conversation around these bills. Finally, there's one bill presented today that we find to be fully in line with the administration's efforts to reduce cycle times and streamline processes, Intro 863. Intro 863 makes critical reforms to Section 312A of the New York City Charter, commonly referred to as Local Law 63, by increasing the threshold of the law's applicability contracts valued at $1 million, up from $200,000, and decreasing public notice periods for 60 days to at least 10 days prior to certain unplanned contract actions. The city's contracting budget continues to grow, rendering the $200,000 threshold outdated. In FY23, roughly $39 billion of the city's $41 billion in contract awards resulted from contracts over $1 million. Raising the threshold would continue to account for the vast majority of applicable contract dollars, while reducing the administrative burden and resulting increases in procurement timeliness for lower value awards. Additionally, this reform will increase the effectiveness of city contracts with our MWBE vendors by exempting MWBE small purchases from the law, which will reduce contracting delays with this essential vendor community. In addition to these streamlining efforts, Intro 863 clarifies and codifies agency compliance processes aimed at increasing transparency for contracts that were not included on the annual plans. In closing, I would like to thank Chair Wan and the committee for your continued partnership and look forward to further discussion on the bills presented today, in addition to identifying opportunities to advance existing programs and initiatives. Although there is still much to do, the work we've accomplished together has consistently set the standard for equity, transparency, and accessibility, and we will continue to prioritize these values across all work streams. Along with my colleagues, I'm now happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Flores. Per your testimony, I have a few questions. I know that all of our friends here right now because they want to make sure that city contracts are paid on time. And it is very concerning to me to hear about the 5% pegs that have affected all of our city agencies, especially our beloved Mayor's Office of Contracts. And I want to make myself clear in the room, Passport is not perfect, but it is much better than what we were before, especially a paper-based system. And in no way is the council or myself pushing for a replacement of Passport, but we want to make sure that Passport is fully funded so that we can make sure that the migration happens smoothly, as well as all of the enhancements that we want to be committed to ensure that we have an easier time for all of our nonprofit providers and all of our vendors to be able to have a digital centralized system where they can access as well as apply and track their contracts with the city. So for the original Passport maintenance renewal contract, that was considered to be $23.8 million, and then it seems that the revised contract, because of the pegs, were reduced to by $7.2 million to $16.6 million. So if we were to divide that by 36 months, it seems that now it'll be down to $2.4 million annually, resulting in over 100,000 hours reduced or so for the contract. Can you help us understand how this is going to impact all of the expected Passport maintenance and all the enhancements that the task force and everyone else has committed to?
Thank you, Chair Wan. And first, I want to thank you for your continued commitment and support of Passport and the Mayor's Office of Contract Services, even on a beautiful sunny day like today, and always ensuring that we're shedding light on the importance of technology in moving forward with our procurement reform. So I will definitely, some of the details will pass along to my first deputy director, Kim Yu, in terms of the budget and the dollars. I will first say, obviously, the Mayor's Office of Contract Services, all of us are first and foremost are committed to the reform work, not only of the Joint Task Force report, but there is additional reform work that we have hit the ground running from day one. As you may know, we have quarterly PBB meetings. We have reform front and center as our North Star every single day. We did definitely have a sort of perfect storm of having to decommission Accelerator, not by choice, but to do the responsible actions, or that software was for some time no longer going to be supported, and ensuring that we were being responsible about the system integrity, the data integrity, took on this very large project of decommissioning. There have definitely been, with the decommissioning, a change management process, as you know that we may have talked about at our last hearing. Part of the pain points is not just ensuring that we have sufficient funding and resources for Passport proper, but also the dedication that we've attempted to make in being really intentional about providing the appropriate training and outreach, both to our agencies and to our vendors. This has been quite a Herculean task, not only for us, but all of our provider partners and our agencies, in transitioning from a legacy system that's been around for over a decade, and quickly in speedy fashion, learning the ins and outs of how to do the same transactions in Passport. I think I can say confidently that we have really been working in some cases over weekends, in some cases, many days, many nights, ensuring that we are accessible to our nonprofit providers, and trying to address any issues that have arisen because of the change in the migration and full adoption. The good news is that once we get through what I know feels, for folks who are in it, kind of in the eye of the storm, if you would, that we are finally in a place where we can see in the horizon that we will have full adoption of an end-to-end system. And I have to note that we are probably the largest system in the country in terms of not only the number of contracts, but the number of transactions, the number of vendors, and the complexity of functionality that really is soup to nuts, all the way from vendor integrity and registration all the way through payment. We definitely have seen an increase in some of our time to return answers on our tickets. But again, I think we have been 1,000% committed to ensuring that, despite some of the budget changes that you mentioned in your question, that we're responding to our providers. But definitely can have Kim answer more of the dollars questions, unless there's follow-up, Chair.
I want to acknowledge Councilmember Sandy Nurse and Councilmember Eric Botcher have joined the committee hearing. So can you just help me understand, Deputy Director, so because going from a contract for Passport maintenance from 23.8 million to 16.6 is a very steep change. So can you help us understand what that 7.2 million difference was supposed to pay for?
Thank you for the question, Chair Wand. So to start out, I think what you're getting at is the impact. Oh, are you able to hear me? Thank you. So what I will say, I'll start off by addressing in three layers, and I think what you're asking is how the reduction in the contracts will impact services, and honestly and candidly, there will be service impacts and service reductions. So the three levels I'll go into are impact to our vendors, impact to our agencies, and then impact to MOCs. So first and foremost, impact to our vendors. As our vendors are users of our Passport system and also impacted by the decommission of Accelerator, the time that they work within the system, they will have to rely on the services of MOCs, and MOCs overseeing the services that are provided by Evalua, who supports our Passport system, and our Accelerator system. So with the reduction in the resources, there will be possibly additional time that the vendors will face when they have questions regarding their contract processing, their contract registration, and their contract payment. And the second of the third level of impact I will address are the agencies. Our agencies are our providers, and we at MOX oversee the agencies in addition to training them, as Director Flores mentioned, to have proficiency in the system. We also are doing a lot of change management as they adapt from the old system, HHS Accelerator, to the new system, Passport. So they too will be impacted by the reduction in the resources. And last but not least, MOX is impacted as well because we are on the front lines of providing the support to the agencies and the vendors. In addition to the reduction of the Passport contracts, as a result of the PEGs, we do see a reduction in the headcount that Director Flores mentioned. As of fiscal year 2024 exec plan, our MOX headcount was 173. When we review the fiscal year 2025 adopted plan, we are down to 166. So that's a reduction of 14 heads. So I'll stop there.
Okay, so from what I understand, because what I'm trying to get is usually within the contract, we have itemizations or line items for what a breakdown of the cost. So with the 7.2 million reduction, you're saying that it'll impact our vendors. So those are the human service providers, the nonprofits, external contractors, by increasing the number of hours it'll take them to get an answer or the support they need when they have questions for contract registration or payment. Correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then for the agencies, you're referring to our city agencies like Health and Human Services, DFTA for aging, etc. And for them, those providers will also have, it'll impact them for their training and for their change management.
That's correct, Chair.
And then lastly, for MOX, it's also going to impact you all because you're responsible for providing the support to these two partners, the vendors and the agencies, and you're also facing a steep headcount. That was going to be my next question. At our March hearing, when we had asked about what was going to happen with the Passport contract being reduced, who was going to do the work, and you had said that it was going to be internal. So now that you have 14 positions in headcount reduction and 18 vacant positions, can you help me understand how this will also impact Passport and the work that you all are doing? Who is responsible now for working even as you work weekends? Will you just multiply, Kim?
I'll start, Chair Wan. So where we took some of the reductions on our maintenance contract, as First Deputy Director, you mentioned, and I mentioned in my testimony, were through service hours. So that maintenance contract covers a lot of different work. Primarily, I think what folks can understand as clearly as possible is when there are tickets that we receive or issues that we receive from agency users or vendor users with a complication in the system, or they have a blocker in the system, investigating that blocker, investigating that issue, then creating a solution and implementing that solution. Most of that work is done through that maintenance contract. And we put those fixes in through the staff and the hours through that maintenance contract. And so as we mentioned at our last hearing, Chair Wan, some of that work we took on within MOX staff. And so with the vacancy rate as it is now, to your point, we are all working more hours, and I think that's consistent with all city agencies. As I'm sure, I hope that you know, Chair Wan and others on the committee, we are 1,000% committed to ensuring the success of Passport and ensuring the success of our provider partners and being able to acclimate to the system changes, and more importantly, to get through processes quickly and efficiently so they can get paid on time. And so we've been doubling down on the staff that we do have and really trying to ensure that we maintain high morale and understand that we're all rowing in the same direction, and everyone in our staff is committed to seeing the success of Passport. This is once in sort of, and I know this may sound to be too much, but if you've been doing procurement for a long time, this is my 20th year in city government, and the size of scope of what we're doing here with Passport, it has not been done before. And so everyone who's at Mox is committed to the success of Passport, and will continue to do that regardless of what the situation is with the budget. But obviously, we continue to need your support and the support of this committee.
For headcount, I'm just trying to go back to understand the calculation. So if we have a $7.2 million reduction to the Passport contract, and we divide that by 36 months, so it would be $2.4 million annually. What is that? What was that in number of total hours reduced by this contract for Passport with Ivalua and Accenture?
Thank you, Chair Juan. I believe it was 100,000 hours of the maintenance contract.
And are you able to work an additional 100,000 hours with the staff that you have to cover those hours that were lost?
We continue to endeavor at 1,000% to ensure that we are providing services without service gaps to the best of our ability, Chair Juan.
That 100,000 hours reduced is a very high amount. So I just want to emphasize that. And for the headcount, you had just testified how critical it is during this transition to have the resources and all the work that you're doing. That is very important to all of the three parties that you outlined of vendors, agencies, and the contract services itself, agency of contract services itself. And with these forced pegs on all agencies across the board in our city during the transition of the Passport platform upgrade and the migration of all the agencies from Accelerator to Passport, on top of the contract reduction, I'm just trying to understand. So now you had also alluded to the quality assurance contract. How much was the quality assurance contract that was also impacted by the PEGs?
The original estimate, Chair Juan, for the quality assurance contract was $1 million. We had not started that contract when we decided to put that forward as part of the PEG process.
So I know that everyone in this room, we find contracts very exciting and sexy, worth waking up for in the morning. But I think this is very alarming because the people in this room are here to testify all of the struggles that they're facing to get paid on time and to get paid at all. And if we're hearing that even the quality assurance contract was cut, then who is doing quality assurance? Ourselves? We're checking ourselves on the quality of the work? Okay, I think the silence speaks for itself. And we will hear more in the testimonies of how the quality assurance is an extremely important part of any platform. No matter what kind of technology you roll out in any agency, there needs to be a separate contract with quality assurance so that we are keeping our vendors, who are external, building us these platforms to make our lives easier, to ensure that our lives are getting easier, not more difficult.
If I may, Chair Juan, just to also clarify, that the contracts in question, both the Ivalua and Accenture contracts, as you know, Chair Juan, were implemented and registered during the last administration. The contract setup did not include at that time, nor did it include at the beginning of this administration, a quality assurance contract. So the setup had always been that Mox, and obviously partnership with, when appropriate, with OTI, then do it. Are doing our due diligence to ensure and maintaining, and I assure you that we take it very seriously to ensure that our contractors are meeting the requirements of the contract. So just want to say that for the record. Obviously, to your point, though, best practice, would be, which is why we had intended to bring this new element into the fold as additional resources to ensure with all of the transition and the work that we're doing that we would have additional resources. But just wanted to put that for the record, Chair.
And it is indeed a best practice, especially in every other industry. So I think it is important for my team to make sure that we submit an intro, making sure that every single platform or technology that the city procures has a separate contract to make sure that there's quality assurance built in, to make sure that all of our users, the public, has quality products and that they're not struggling, and that when there is another peg that comes around, quality assurance isn't the one that gets cut, but it's something that is making sure that it goes on. Okay. And then thank you. For the going back to the $2.4 million annually that will be reduced for service tickets themselves, or just improving enhancements, because I know that we hear every time we have a hearing on nonprofits getting paid on time, folks tell us all the time that they are calling Mox and giving feedback on how to make this better. So there's clearly a feedback loop from our users to create new enhancements. So what's going to happen now where for functionality that to meet the timeline that you had committed to publicly with the task force to make Passport perform at a certain threshold or at a benchmark?
Thank you, Chair Wan. So first I would say, as per my testimony, that we have made some progress, really good progress, and are on track for progress for some of the key elements of the task force report, particularly those related to Passport. As I mentioned in my testimony, one of the recommendations and discussions around enhancements were specific functionalities, new functionality. And so two key parts of new functionality that will be coming out later this calendar year is Passport Vault, which to everyone who loved dearly Accelerator, when it was originally rolled out, it included Document Vault, which was a key factor and request from the sector. Passport, in its when it was rolled out, did not have Document Vault. So that is going to be a key achievement from the task force report rolling out Passport Vault. In addition, subcontractor management will also be in Passport, and while obviously contractors and the public normally look at subcontracting functionality and approval sort of only as, but very important, an issue that impacts MWBEs, it actually is a huge issue that impacts the not-for-profit sector and our human service providers. As you know, traditionally, out of the $41 billion or however much we do in every particular year, human services accounts between 48 to 50% of the portfolio, and many of those contracts have subcontracts. That process currently is either in paper, email, snail mail, by pigeon carrier, and is a little bit of a black box and contributes to the pain that both primes and subs and vendors who are providing critical services to our New Yorkers feel in the payment process. And so those are two key areas where we will be delivering, amongst other things that I mentioned in my testimony around Passport. To your question and intro regarding feedback from providers, so we get feedback and make enhancements over a number of different ways. And also I want to just make a distinction between enhancements and sort of like to have, right? The workflows and the functionality of Passport for most cases are what they are. And as folks know, a big bulk of the functionality was rolled out sourcing during COVID, which was a huge accomplishment of the previous administration. When we receive tickets from both our vendor community, our nonprofit providers, or our agencies, all of that's tracked, and we look at that as if there is a actual bug or issue that needs to be fixed. And if that's the case, we tap into our Accenture maintenance contract to put in a fix for that issue, versus continuing to engage with the sector, not only through that ticket process, but we've done road shows, we've done multiple situations where we meet with not-for-profit providers, our construction providers, our construction agencies, our not-for-profit agencies, and get their wish list of functionality that they hope to have in future state. So to the extent that we're able to put some of those smaller level enhancements in our regular fixed schedule, we do that. but we're not in a position right now to sort of distract from ensuring that full migration successfully has happened, that we have full adoption of over 50% of our portfolio doing all their invoices in our system, now Passport, and making sure that we are using our resources effectively to prepare for and implement R6, and then continue to prioritize any future state of enhancements if and when funding becomes available.
I have a follow-up question. According to the fiscal year 25 executive budget, there was $10.5 million less in the technology strategy budget. Can you help me understand this 10.5 million versus the 7.2 million that we see in reduction? Or we could follow up. Yeah.
So I'll start, and then First Deputy Director might have the numbers here if we can. Otherwise, we will follow up, Chair. So the budget already had a certain amount of expected decrease in our OTPS budget based on one-time funding for enhancements and our 5.1 release and our migration, and now our upcoming release 6. And so there was already an expected dip over fiscal years for those one-time investments. Then in addition to that, as you noted in your questions earlier, there was, as you annualize it over 3 years, the 7.2 million was an additional 2.4 reduction on top of what we expected to be a reduction after the one-time investment for recent releases.
Okay. And then I'm going to now turn over to procurement reform questions. Thank you so much for helping us clarify the PEG reductions. As of January 2024, over 85% of human service contracts were registered late, even higher than the already unacceptable citywide average of 77%. Can you help us understand what factors contribute to so many human service contracts being registered late than the PEGs that we were just speaking of?
Sure, Chair Wan. I'll start, and then if I need an assist from Associate Director Elke, I'll pass it on to Elke. So our numbers, when we look at contracts for FY24, for FY23, do not align with the 85%, which from our understanding, depending on if you're noting either some recent public reports or recent reports from the Controller's Office, are more inclusive, including contracts that are either not human service contracts or not multi-year contracts and discretionary contracts. In terms of the contracts that have been submitted on time, the last fiscal year, as I mentioned in my testimony, we had a significant positive increase in the number of contracts that were submitted on time. And as you know, if we look at the PBB rules and sort of look at what the standard of sort of timely, as long as a contract has been submitted to the controller, before the end of the fiscal year for a new contract starting in FY July 1st, that contract will most likely be registered within 30 days, or in some cases much less than that. And so we deem those not to be significantly late. As you know, we do have the ability now, unlike in the past, once that contract is registered, for advances to be released immediately once there is a budget on that contract. And as I mentioned in my testimony, we have taken some proactive steps to mitigate additional pain by directing agencies to issue an additional 15% on top of those contracts. But I'll pass off to Elke. Is there any other data to respond to the Chair's question?
Thank you, Chair Wan and Committee. As Director Flores mentioned, we are committed to the timely registration of our human service contracts. We do have a yearly initiative where we project manage alongside our agency partners to ensure that contracts are submitted to the Comptroller's Office by July 1st in order to ensure that those standard 25% advances to the sector can go up by the time that invoices are able to be submitted in the system. I will also note that we are happy to collaborate on any data coordination. A lot of the external reporting that we often see includes City Council discretionary award contracts, which, as we know, are inherently retroactive since the majority of contracts that are designated, whether in Schedule C or subsequent transparency resolutions, are not officially communicated to the agencies or go through the clearance process until well after July 1st.
To go back to the $2.4 million reduction annually, will MOC still be able to have proper functionality for all the new users who have joined, and also meet the timelines, the deadlines that you have set for the next release this year?
In terms of release 6 for document vault and subcontracting, we're on
Yes.
schedule
Okay.
to do that release, which will have those two major components of functionality before the end of this calendar year.
Okay, that is very impressive. Thank you for still somehow managing that without any money. In 2022, the Joint Controller/Mayor Task Force to get nonprofits paid on time issued a detailed action memo with recommendations to get nonprofits paid more quickly. Can you help us get a clear summary of what progress has been made over the last 2 years implementing which reforms and which items remain of those, and which does the administration see as the highest priority? And can you also give us a status of the task force? Are you all still meeting? And if so, is council able to join the next meeting or a representative from the council?
Thank you for the question, Chair Wan. At last blush that we reviewed our progress for all of the items in the task force report, we were close to 60% of those had been accomplished at this time, which included, as some of those highlighted in my testimony, Clear the Backlog Initiative, allowance clauses, multi-year discretionary contracts, expanded the RGF fund, contract stat. We also, in obviously partnership and led by the council, Local Law 169, which for human service timeliness, and standing up the nonprofit, Mayor's Office of Nonprofit Services. So as you may know, once the task force issued the report, there was an executive steering committee, which included partners across all city agencies like Office of Management and Budget, City Hall, the Comptroller's Office, and they kept us to account with multiple work streams that put together project plans and goals for making sure that we were staying on target, and with the both short, medium, and long-term goals that were outlined in the report. And there are not many that are left for us to achieve, and anything that's not achieved yet is already ongoing, but happy to spend time with you offline and those others in the committee and walk you through some of those in more in detail if interested.
Could you answer, sorry if I missed it, I was reading my notes. So does the task force still meet, and if so, how often?
The task force no longer meets. The task force met up until releasing the report. And then after the release of the report, there was an executive steering committee that was created, which again included both the administration and the Comptroller's Office. And they monitored and kept accountable working groups from across the city.
And does that executive steering committee still meet?
The executive steering committee, we report out to the first deputy mayor and to City Hall on progress. Obviously, the first deputy mayor of City Hall corresponds and interacts with the controller directly when there are updates or there are questions, but most of the work is either done or significantly in progress.
So now that the nonprofit task force is no longer active, how do the nonprofit providers give you the direct feedback?
So the updates to the nonprofit task force action items, our office sends out and has sent out a number of updates to the sector, telling them where we are in our progress. We have also provided and partnered with some of the folks who are in this room with our beloved strategic partners in the sector, whether it's doing roadshows, which we have done before we started doing the migration process, and other opportunities for us to engage directly with the sector to give updates on where we are in the task force. I believe the first deputy mayor herself was also at an event with one of the umbrella groups here last week and gave an update on our progress on the report. And so we have multiple sort of avenues of engagement with the sector, but as always, if there are recommendations of how we can engage differently, we'll always take those.
It seems that the Borough of Queens has some FOMO. They were not part of the task force, as I was given awareness of, and it seems like a lot of people are clamoring to be part of a task force again. So.
Well, I will say recently the administration announced the launch of the Mayor's Office of Nonprofit Services Advisory Council, and there are a number of key players both in this room and across the sector, which I believe represent all of the boroughs, Chair Juan, who are participating and representing in each of the three committees that were formed as a response to one of those key task force recommendations as well. But happy to share afterwards the list of all of the providers and who are chairing all of those committees, and would be happy to take back to the administration if you don't see enough Queens representation there, Chair.
Speaking of the Mayor's Office of Nonprofits, can you help us understand the status of that office since Director Ford has moved on?
Yes, Chair Juan. That office still is in existence, very active. As you know, reports directly to Deputy Mayor Almazar, and there really hasn't been a skip of beat from the transition where our inaugural Director Ford and all the amazing work that she did to stand up the office and really connect with the sector and establish really good relationships and avenues of communication. As I mentioned, the inauguration of the advisory council was announced after Director Ford's departure, so there is continued work and activity happening in that office. We work very closely with that office, and we work very closely with that office as they engage with the sector and have feedback from the sector either on one-off contract-specific issues and or bigger picture sort of reform questions and policy recommendations.
How many staff members are there now employed and working at the Mayor's Office of Nonprofit Services? Last time it was one.
It's more than one, Chair Juan. We might be able to answer that now. If not, we will get back to you.
Okay.
They have a budget. They have a head count of 7. I believe they have 4, but we can definitely confirm and come back.
Okay, 4. Just out of curiosity, do you have a number of how many vendors of nonprofit human service providers the city has in their purview for all agencies for 4 staff members to manage?
I'm not sure of the question, Chair Juan, but I would say that obviously across the city of New York, with our very robust portfolio with nonprofit providers, which includes agencies that contract Administration of Children's Services, Department of Social Services, Department of Aging, and so on and so forth. We have thousands of staff across the city of New York that have different levels of engagement with the nonprofit sector, including in contracting and budgeting. And the Mayor's Office of Nonprofit Services, not unlike many other of mayor's offices that really have a focus on ensuring that they are thought leaders, that they are leading in terms of policy agenda, and really keeping us and others within the administration accountable to answering to a particular sector. So I think in totality, there's an investment and an importance that I think from day one this administration, which includes the Joint Task Force report of how important our relationship is with the sector.
Okay, because I just want to emphasize that with thousands of nonprofits who service our city, the ratio of 4 or even 7 at full headcount to do justice, I think, is not enough. The million-dollar question that we always get asked is the task force called for establishing specific timeframes and deadlines for each stage of the procurement process. Has the administration done this? If not, what barriers remain to setting clear timelines? And can you help us understand more information of what the status is and what may be holding it up? And another question that I get asked all the time is, how can we keep agencies accountable if it's not going to be financial?
Thank you for the question, Chair Wan. I'll start, and then my staff will keep me honest. So as I mentioned in my testimony, and I think in a previous response, with leadership from the council and partnership with the administration, recent local law 169 was passed, and we are on track to release the first report in October of this calendar year, as prescribed in the report, that will have crucial data that will inform future state of particular timeframes and timelines to keep ourselves accountable. But I think what's important to note, and as we testified during previous hearings related to that local law, is that it really has to be sort of a multi-layered, multifaceted approach to keep us accountable and ensure that we are holding up our end of the bargain. Having time frames is part of it. Having the tools in order to monitor performance is part of it, but also having a community of practice of monitoring performance as part of that. And so, as I mentioned in my testimony, we have begun not only in the release of our internal performance tracking tool contract stat, but the administration has already had sessions with our agency commissioners. Some of it was also discussed in the inaugural Mayor's Office of Nonprofit Services Advisory Council, of continuing to build on that practice of what data that we have access to, how we use that data to inform our decisions to ensure that our cycle times are shorter, that we get contracts registered on time, payments on time, and also how do we use that information to keep our agencies accountable. In our timeliness initiative, both last fiscal year and what we're doing this fiscal year, we use data and we have goals that we hold our agencies to in terms of hitting certain milestones by a particular time frame so that we can achieve our goal of having all of our contracts submitted to the controller on time. So it is an ongoing iterative process, but that's exactly where we intend to be, and local law 169 is going to be a big part of assisting there.
From the Mayor's Office of Contracts' own fiscal year 23 Human Services report, I am very troubled by the numbers that almost 100% of the contracts were untimely for agencies like SBS, and then following MOCJ, and for DYCD, they were at 17% on time. HPD, 0% on time. And DSS, HRA, 42% on time. DHS, 41% on time. And others are hovering around 59%. So can you help us understand what is the accountability for these agencies from your own report where they're just not on time? There needs to be substantial compliance with timeliness for contracting given their personal performance according to your own data.
Thank you, Chair Wan. I did not hear the first part of your question. Are you referring to the indicators report, the annual indicators report?
Yes.
Thank you, Chair Wan, for the clarification. So first I will say that there are multiple ways that we look at both timeliness and retroactivity, and just to make that distinction first and then to get to your specific question. So when I said earlier in my testimony and some of your responses to some of your questions that we achieved 81% submitted to the controller on time. The measurement there is that we have submitted a contract for registration by the end of the fiscal year. The indicators report and retroactivity is calculated slightly differently. So first, the universe of contracts is anything that was registered within the fiscal year. So that's where we start off in the universe of contracts before we do any analysis. So regardless of when the contract start date was, anything registered within the fiscal year is what we're doing analytics on. So that may include a contract that actually was a FY 23 and 22 contract that was registered in the fiscal year. So the retroactive or lateness is if it's 1 day late from the registration date versus the contract date, it is considered retroactive, and as I mentioned, we consider significantly retroactive at different intervals after we get over the 30 days. In some cases, the examples that you mentioned, we have agencies like HPD that have very small human service portfolios, and so obviously if an agency has 1 or 2 contracts and they did not get to them on time in the fiscal year, it kind of skews the data. But our number in terms of percent retroactive continues to improve every year, and we're hoping that with all of the efforts that we have put into place last year and this year, that the numbers will be better this year as well when we issue our indicators report after the end of the fiscal year.
So how does this square with the PBB Rule 4-12 for interest payments?
So 4-12 requires, and I think I mentioned in my testimony, that first, the CHIPO, so my office, does the analysis of whether or not an agency or agencies were significantly retroactive. And again, that's significantly retroactive for that particular fiscal year. We do not consider, and just consistent with practice over many years and over many different administrations, contracts that are registered within the 30-day period to be significantly retroactive. And so, we make that assessment. We don't take that lightly. There are interest payments that are made every fiscal year. I do not have the number off the top of my head of what may have been paid last fiscal year, but ultimately it's a collective decision depending on the overall performance. And last year, as was indicated in the indicators report, we did not determine to be significantly retroactive to implement that across-the-board interest payment.
Okay. The next question is, even when contracts are registered, reimbursement rates often cover only 80%. Let me say it again. Even when contracts are registered, reimbursement rates only cover 80 cents on the dollar for program costs. How is the administration working to address this issue of chronically underfunded nonprofit contracts? I was just at a town hall yesterday for education, and we heard this again from nonprofit providers who are running 3K programs, that they have to subsidize it with their private twos and infant programs because it's just not enough, and they're having issues even with paid parity for their teachers and keeping teachers because they get paid much less than their DOE counterparts. So we would really like to understand what is happening for chronically underfunded nonprofit contracts.
Thank you, Chair Wan. Speaking, specifically to the 40-plus mayoral agencies, I understand and definitely hear both the sentiment that you just described and that I hear from the nonprofit sector, which is why the commitment from the administration from day one has been investing in our sector and our providers. And as you know, I do want to make sure, in partnership with the council, to date, over $1.4 billion that have been invested in the human services sector, both for the workforce enhancement and our commitment for COLA over 3 fiscal years, is a huge investment. We're getting closer and closer to, I think, in partnership with the sector, and I see some of the partners here today, in carefully listening to the issues that they've been raised over having previous years not sufficient investment in the sector, and I think we're catching up and making a lot of good ground. And we continue to work with the sector. We're not done listening. We're not done partnering. And I think the budget reflects the continued investment in the sector.
I'm getting a lot of eyebrows, Lisa, from that answer. Kim, do you have any other?
I see Michelle Jackson right there. We just had all these celebrations of the COLA, right? So their eyebrows behind Michelle Jackson.
Yes, there's a lot of, I think we still have a long way to go. I just think it's not acceptable that our nonprofit providers qualify for the same benefits like SNAP that we administer and that they administer themselves. They might as well register themselves as they're doing it, and many of them do. So I think we've got a long way to go. I also want to acknowledge that we've been joined by Councilmember Althea Stevens. Nonprofit leaders have called for a temporary moratorium on audits, inspections, and reporting requirements that are not legally mandated in order to allow them to focus on service delivery until their contracts are paid. Would the administration be open to this form of relief?
Thank you for the question, Chair Wan. We have been taking many efforts to mitigate sort of burdens of our nonprofit sector, not only during transition from accelerator to passport, but some of the work that is, frankly, the hard work of rolling up your sleeves and doing dismantling and really reshaping our relationship and the paradigm of how we oversee and how we engage with our provider partners. And so I do say that look forward to those conversations, especially now that the advisory council has been formed. That is definitely one of the topics that I know will be discussed during those meetings. We also have been doing work, as you may know, at MOX in creating a risk-based audit policy called the Human Services New York City Standard Audited Financial Reports, or SAFR. That will lead to impactful audit results, which will reduce redundancies for providers by leveraging standard audit guidelines and improved audit quality and timeliness. And for nonprofits, this will make the policy more predictable, timely, and comprehensive. And that work is well underway, and we hope to expand upon it now that the advisory council has been formed.
Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Councilmember Stevens to ask a few questions.
Good morning. How you guys doing?
Good morning, Councilmember.
Just a couple questions. The first one I'll start with is the city charter required the procurement policy board to establish a time frame for each stage of the contract process, but this still has not happened. So last year we enhanced the local law 169 of 2023, which requires MOX to study and issue a report on the timing and duration of city procurement process for human service contracts, and for the PPB to use the study to issue rules pursuant in the charter's responsibilities. How's the study coming along, and are rules regarding time frame in the works?
Thank you for that question, because it gives me the opportunity to once again say that I appreciate your partnership in the final draft of that rule, of that intro, that which is now local law 169, and that we are on track to complete the first report as required, the time frame required by the local law, which is October of this year. That will be critical data for us to take the next steps, as you mentioned in your question, of establishing those time frames. And happy to obviously meet with you and others in the committee to walk you through that report and next steps once that's issued on time in October.
Okay. I'm happy to hear that it's going to be issued on time, especially with some of the I know challenges with the PEGs that you guys are experiencing, and not having adequate staff to kind of do it. So I know you guys are being stretched thin. So, I don't often have a bleeding heart for agencies in the city, because I like to hold people responsible. But I do know that there are a lot of challenges, especially with the transfer of passport and these PEGs that are, much a small agency, it gets felt differently. And I think sometimes that gets lost in the conversation around what it looks like when a bigger agency takes a 5% cut than when a smaller agency who has a much smaller budget and staff, it's looked and felt a lot differently. And so we definitely have to make sure we have to continue to uplift that. So I'll give you some grace. Because we all know.
Council member. I know it's. I
we
know
know
it
this
doesn't
wasn't
last
the bill I
forever.
wanted.
I appreciate it. I appreciate, as I mentioned, not only your support, council member, in full transparency and honesty, but your willingness to trust that we are going to do the job that we set ourselves to do, and that collaboration and negotiation, which I know you have made it clear was not exactly what you wanted, but I commit to you, and I hope that you understand that both myself and the office commits not only to do that report on time, but have open dialogue around the next steps after that report is issued.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I said, I don't give a lot of them grace, but I think you guys get a little bit more grace, because, we have to also figure out how do we support you to make sure that this agency isn't gutted to the point where it's going to hinder the rest of the city. And I think that a lot of the issues and concerns providers have are connected to these PEGs. And it doesn't just affect your agency, it affects the entire city. And, it's often said that this isn't a sexy committee or a sexy part of the... We're very sexy. I mean, I think so. But we know that this isn't what people are going to be on the steps yelling about, right? And so I think we have to also figure out how do we uplift this work, because it's so instrumental and important. Everybody wants to get paid. and you pay everybody. So we got to make sure that that's happening. I just have a couple more questions. Can you talk to me a little about, have you guys gotten any guidance on like COLA and what that's going to look like in that rollout?
Thank you, Council Member, and I'm so glad that Michelle Jackson is sitting right in the front row. So yes, we have been working very closely with our counterparts and our partners of the Office of Management and Budget. HSC has been an instrumental partner, not only obviously in the campaign for COLA, but also ensuring that we're working together collaboratively on how we're going to implement COLA in a way that is both manageable and efficient, and obviously expeditiously as possible. We just issued notification to providers yesterday. GovDelivery went out with a very short announcement around next steps that they should be hearing from their agencies. Is it by the end of the fiscal year? Is that what we said? Okay. By the end of the fiscal year, they will receive some information from their agencies with a template and spreadsheet to verify dollar amounts for each of their contracts. And we are hoping, that we are going to hit the ground running with implementation in terms of that COLA getting into the contract as quickly as possible using existing allowance clauses and advances wherever possible. So we're on track to do this as expeditiously as possible, Councilmember.
Well, I'm happy that you guys are creating or have somewhat of a framework / plan for the COLA, but can you talk to me a little about the workforce enhancement? Because I'm hearing from providers that some of them still haven't got the indirect funding for the workforce enhancement, and it's taken providers almost 2 years for those contracts and those actions to have happened. So can you talk to me a little bit about the workforce enhancement?
Thank you, Council Member. We have been working closely with Office of Management and Budget and our agencies to ensure that, as you know, the process for the calculations of the workforce enhancement were done as quickly as possible. As I mentioned earlier, in totality, both the workforce enhancement and the COLA announcement, it's over a $1.4 billion investment in the sector. We believe that we have been on track in totality for the workforce enhancement. If there are particular issues that are delayed, obviously I know it is not ideal to do one-offs, but we'll definitely take those from you and the providers that you're hearing from and track those down and see if there are particular issues with the underlying contract.
No, I really appreciate it, and thank you. And yes, Julie Wan, your committee is very sexy, and I didn't mean to imply that you were not sexy. So thank you.
I appreciate it. I need that. I need that every morning from Councilmember Stevens. We just have a few more questions. Has the administration analyzed how much city funding nonprofits have had to spend on interest payments due to taking out loans to cover expenses while waiting for contracts to be paid?
Thank you for the question, Chair Wan. I do not have a number of how many vendors or not-for-profit providers have taken out loans other than obviously the loan program that is managed through the city in partnership with the Fund for the City of New York. Our current revolving fund is $62 million. And as I mentioned in my testimony, we have seen an increase in the type and size of vendor, a nonprofit provider that has accessed that loan fund, as you know, which is interest-free. Since we were able to deliver on one of the task force recommendations earlier this calendar year, I believe in January or February of this calendar year, we reissued the loan program eligibility qualifications, significantly expanding eligibility to get access to a loan, and we streamlined the application process and the application itself significantly, and retrained all of our agencies to ensure that we are maximizing access to the interest-free loan program through the Mayor's Office of Contract Services.
Thank you. Last question. Have you heard of the nonprofit Sea Change Capital Partners who decided to create their own version of ContractStat?
I have heard of Sea Change.
Oh, okay.
I see John McIntosh in the audience.
Okay, I kind of
I recognize all of my friends here.
Okay, I see some light in your eyes. So now I'm going to ask you some questions about it. So you've reviewed the Sea Change's work. Are you committed to is the administration open to making ContractStat public instead of internal, like a public version of ContractStat?
Thank you for the question, Chair Wan. I have not reviewed the recent report by Sea Change. I was answering a direct question that I am familiar with Sea Change and John
Okay.
McIntosh. I have not had the opportunity to review his latest report. As I mentioned earlier in my testimony, and I think we've talked about this in other City Council hearings, the recommendation in the task force report was to create contract stat, which was not listed in the report necessarily as a technology tool, but the practice of performance management and a performance management tool. We have issued a internal performance dashboard called Contract Stat, which, as you know, we've talked previously at council hearings that Mox built internally to ensure that we were on track with the task force recommendation. We have release that performance tool and that practice at the direction and leadership of First Deputy Mayor and multiple Deputy Mayors with our commissioners. I think we've had 2 of those sessions so far with our agencies. We have also reviewed contract stat with the Comptroller's Office and showed them the functionality that exists thus far. We're committed, as I mentioned earlier, when I first came on board, one of the first things that we rolled out in the first quarter of the first calendar year was Passport Public, and which includes numerous data points that were not publicly available before, including milestones and across all contracts, whether it's in sourcing, whether it's an award, whether it's just initiated. It also has heat maps around retroactivity and other performance metrics. And so, I do see in a future state with appropriate resources and ability to ensure that the data is accurate, that some of that practice will converge at a future state. But we have a lot of that information currently available on Passport Public, but always committed to continuing with the resources that we have to use those performance tools.
Thank you. We're going to transition to a few questions on legislation. For Intro 801, subcontractor denial explanations, what is the current process for notifying prime contractors when a proposed subcontract is denied? So does an agency provide detailed reasons for denials?
Thank you for the question, Chair Wan. So the current rules, as you may know, in PBB 4-13, which oversees, lays out the process for subcontractor approvals, an agency must approve a subcontractor for a prime before the prime can initiate for the subcontractor to begin work on a contract. And there is a approval process. It includes various information, and some of that information may of a subcontractor. As I mentioned in my testimony, we're going to have a lot more information and visibility and transparency into that process that will inform sort of future state of how we sort of use that information and make policy changes at an appropriate time once that information is in Passport, which will be part of Release 6. And so in Passport, once we do the release, we will have both subcontractor information at the time that a prime bids on a contract where appropriate and applicable. We will also have the actual approval of the subcontractor in Passport. And then, because it's happening in our Passport system, we will have payment information against that contract, the prime and the sub in the system. So I think, related to this intro, I think we would be in a better position to sort of discuss the need for this and what we'll have at our fingertips through Passport that we don't have available now because it's not an electronic system.
Something that I have difficulty reconciling in my mind about subcontractors. So, for example, a few months ago in September, we had a hearing with DHS about subcontracts for food in migrant shelters or in regular shelters. And when we asked them questions about the subcontractors of the food and the quality of the food, a lot of the times the agency will testify that they have no control over subcontracts, that whoever is the master contract holder, that they get to make those decisions. So can you help me understand, for all of these agencies, what jurisdiction do they have over subcontracts, and what power do they have on choosing who the subcontractor is?
Thank you for the question, Chair Wan. I'll start and probably pass off to Special Counsel Charles Diamond to add on. So just at a general distinction, the PBB rules require that an agency approve the specific subcontractor that the prime vendor intends to use for goods or services. And some of that process includes integrity-related information around the vendor. It also includes some review to ensure that the prime vendor has followed sort of the bidding out process as required in their contract, depending on contract dollar value of that they did a fair process and a competitive process in the selection of their subcontractor. The city does not have privity directly with the subcontractor. The prime is legally required to ensure that they're providing the goods and services at the quality and the level of performance required under the contract. And if that includes subcontractors, it's still the prime that is responsible for ensuring that that work is done in accordance with the contract.
Good morning, Chair Wan. Yeah, I would only add further that it can sometimes be a creature of the contract itself. So certain agencies will have certain contracts. DHS is the best example, who have a very robust subcontractor approval system based off of their experience with their portfolio over X amount of years, if this is what they need. So certain agency contracts will have specific requirements that will be different. However, as Director Flores said, the general rule is out there in the PPB rules regarding approving that subcontractor, but there is room for more nuance, and if something is varying, it's likely because of the specific contract at play. As Director Flores mentioned, food versus something else, but it can also be agency versus agency, and I believe the best source of those is almost always the fiscal manual of that specific agency will outline their process. So I'd say that's the best resource in terms of if you're seeing any variance from agency to agency.
Thank you. Prime contractors argue that subcontractor denials often come with inadequate explanation, delaying their ability to find alternative subs. Would you be open to establishing a standard timeline for agency responses to help address this issue?
Thank you for the question, Chair Wan. I would start off, as I mentioned earlier, that in a paper process, as you mentioned, I think at the top of this hearing, right, we are in a situation where technology is not perfect, but technology has gotten us light years ahead of where we were before, when everything was in paper. The subcontracting process is still, again, in paper. It's not an electronic system that we have visibility into across the whole portfolio. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, we definitely would imagine that there are areas for efficiency gains and improvement in the process that will be better positioned to implement and have some more specific recommendations for once we have adoption of the subcontractor approval process in Passport.
And I would further add, Chair Wan, that there are timelines in certain standard contracts. So once again, in that fiscal manual, agencies are certainly encouraged to have those timelines. As Director Flores says, once we get that data, for people to then check against that, I think that will be the real next step. But certainly, agencies do establish timelines for themselves to approve these actions, and we look forward to continuing that conversation to make that more effective.
Just like you testified earlier about DHS having a more robust contract, can you help me understand, it wouldn't be helpful for them to have a standardized timeline for subcontract responses because everyone has different requirements?
Well, Chair Wan, first I would say in terms of robust, I wouldn't necessarily say more robust, I would say different. I think based off of their specific portfolio, of course, you compare DHS to a construction agency, the substantive needs that they need to understand about who they're contracting with may be very different. So certainly there is some room there, but absolutely agencies have the option of building in those timelines. In terms of general rules, PPB 413 does establish those requirements. In terms of contractual negotiation, there's always the option for agencies to go beyond that to a certain extent. But certainly the structures of PPB 413 will govern it in general, and then agencies are able to negotiate beyond that, of course, in conjunction with the law department, with others who have to approve certain contract language.
Okay. And for Intro 802 standard insurance requirements, as we talked about food vendors, especially for DHS, or for HPD, or for H&H, does the administration currently have standard insurance policy requirements for vendors? Are the types of insurance that could potentially be eliminated as unnecessary?
Thank you, Chair Wan. I'll start. Yes, the city does have standard insurance policies that are issued through the city's law department, corp counsel, and there are insurance policies that are standard depending on the types of goods or services. Whether it's legal services or construction services. So there is a significant standardization across the board, both in our standard contracts. So, for example, we have a standard human services contract, we have a standard construction contract, just to name a few, but also in our Appendix A, and we have slight variations of Appendix A depending on the industry of contracts. So there is a robust standardization that exists currently across all of our contracts. And definitely, as I mentioned, Corp Counsel has that role and responsibility of ensuring how we mitigate risk across our complete portfolio, which does not only include the mayoral agencies, but the non-mayoral agencies, obviously with the robustness of Corp Counsel's role and responsibility. And so definitely, would look forward to future conversations if there are opportunities for additional standardization related to food. Would welcome that conversation, obviously, with the Mayor's Office of Food Policy, who leads in that area, sort of as a thought leader and policy related to food.
Yes, because this, for Intro 802, this came about by our partner Rethink Foods, who's here to testify, as well as smaller restaurants. A lot of these smaller nonprofits and restaurants who want to be food vendors for the city, for a lot of these shelters, they just simply cannot afford to have multi-insurances for all these different agencies. So for small nonprofits, owners' insurance requirements are often cited as a barrier to contracting with the city, and establishing a standard insurance policy for these vendors could help reduce the burden, specifically for food insurances. So we would like to have further conversations to delve deeper, because I understand for risk mitigation issues purposes that we can't standardize all insurances across the agencies, but I think if we wanted to be more specific about food insurances, food policy, then I think that there is some room for negotiation there.
Yeah, I would definitely say, Chair Wan, that the Mayor's Office of Food Policy and my office and City Hall, as you know, cornerstone of this administration really has been food since day one, both the sustainability of food, how we can ensure that we are providing healthier food to our children, to those who receive our services, and that we are ensuring additional MWBE participation. I don't think sort of legislating insurance is sort of the way to get there. As I said, during the standardization and issuing of standard policies squarely falls, with the responsibility and role appropriately of Corp Counsel and the Law Department. But I know for a fact that Mayor's Office of Food Policy, who works closely with Rethink Food in our office, and would be happy to have those discussions with you and others in the committee, and how we can find the appropriate avenue for some of that standardization going forward.
Yes, we look forward to continuing that conversation. And then for Intro 803, I also want to acknowledge Councilmember Vernikoff has joined us. For vendor award protest procedures, the bill would authorize vendor representatives, such as unions, labor unions, to protest contract awards on a vendor's behalf. Would the administration support this change?
As I mentioned in my testimony, Chair Wan, at this stage, based on the review of the intro as written, we would not necessarily support this bill. It seems, I'm not exactly sure the intent beyond what you've just mentioned in your question. As you may know, the current charter, or the city charter, already allows for this to be part of the PBB rules. There is very long and robust rule, section 210 of the PBB rules, that governs protest. Obviously, there is always room for engaging with both the council and others if there is an opportunity that we believe we should be making changes to the PBB rule, and that we have an avenue for that, as I mentioned earlier. We have quarterly meetings. We have a very robust PBB. We have members, as you know, both of the administration and the controller's office that sits on the PBB, and so definitely willing to see what issue are we trying to resolve, and how we could appropriately do that with the existing PBB rule 2-10.
Thank you. Councilmember Vernikoff has a question.
Yes, thank you. One of the biggest issues we have in our district, and I know it's also across the city, is with DOE payments as it regards to childcare and daycare centers, and they're obviously having issues paying, doing payroll. So what measures are you guys taking to improve that process?
Thank you for your question, Council Member. We work closely with all of our agencies. Obviously, New York City Public Schools, while not a mayoral agency, is an important partner of ours, and we engage with them in our timeliness efforts, also engage with them in sort of best practices around performance management. We engage with them on specific issues that come up around that contracting portfolio, and also with our partners at the Mayor's Office of Nonprofit Services when there are questions that come up around that particular portfolio of payments. And so if there are additional areas that are not being addressed, happy to take that back with our partners in New York City Public Schools.
Thank you.
Along with that question as a follow-up, is DOE now included in Passport?
Thank you for that question, Chair Wan. There are some contracts from New York City Public Schools that exist in Passport. Some of those were entered into Passport during the tail end of the last administration. There are still some contracts that are in Passport now, but it still represents a small proportion of their overall contracting portfolio. But we look forward, sort of in future state, if and when resources are available, to continue to expand, where appropriate, the number of contracts in the portfolios that are in Passport.
And I have a few new finance questions that just came in. Can you help us break down the total OTPS funding versus PS funding that was pegged in fiscal year 24?
Thank you for the question, Chair Wan. I want to start out broadly, and then I'll go more narrow. So as of fiscal year 2024, the executive plan for MOX's budget is $44.6 million. Then of that, most of the $21.8 million of that is projected for contract spend for the contracts that are related to Passport. And then I want to be pretty precise with my response to this question. Would you indulge me and repeat the question?
Can you break down the funding exactly for OTPS and then PS for fiscal year 24?
So for the
From what I understand from the testimony that we had with OMB, I believe the 21.4 million that you just cited was part of OTPS.
yes, that's right. Yes, and I'll be pretty precise and just read out the numbers.
Okay.
So for fiscal year 2025, a budget of $30.4 million, which is $17.4 million less than the fiscal year 2024 adopted budget, and $13.5 million less than the fiscal year 2024 current budget.
Okay. And can you list all the agencies that currently pay for MOX headcount?
Mayor's Office of Nonprofit Services, that headcount is on our budget, Chair Wan.
Is there anyone else that covers headcount, like an MOU from a previous administration that covered any staff members for MOX?
For the Mayor's Office of Contract Services, yes, Chair Wan, we have 10 positions that are covered pursuant to an MOU with New York City Public Schools, which expires at the end of this fiscal year.
And what was that agreement for exactly?
Chair Wan, I believe that the bulk of the MOU, the premise, was the New York City Public Schools was entering into their child care contracts into Passport, and there was an understanding that Mayor's Office Contract Services would support them in both entering in those contracts, sourcing those contracts, and normal contract management transactions in the life of the contract. And I don't have the number off the top of my head, but the total portfolio of those contracts that were entered into Passport. And so the MOU covers 10 MOX staff to support that work, as in the MOU, which again expires in the end of this fiscal year.
And you don't remember how much the MOU was for, the estimate?
$800,000.
For $800,000, and now with the MOU expiring, what will happen to those 10 staff members?
Thank you for the question, Chair Wan. The 10 staff members, over the years, again, this MOU predates me and this administration. Work on a number of portfolios, not limited to New York City Public Schools, and they are valued members of our team. And obviously, despite the MOU expiring at the end of this fiscal year, they will remain valued members of our team.
Do you have the titles of those positions, those 10 members?
I do, Chair Wan. We can send that to you after the hearing.
Okay, great. Are there any other agencies that have an MOU with MOX or covering any costs for employees at MOX?
I don't believe we have any other intracity funding.
Okay. I think you should get more intercity funding. Okay, so that pretty much wraps it up for our questions today, and we will move into testimony. So I'm going to turn it back to our general counsel. Thank you so much for testifying today.
Thank you so much, Chair and council members.
Okay. I now open the hearing for public testimony. I remind members of the public that this is a formal government proceeding and that decorum shall be observed at all times. As such, members of the public shall remain silent at all times. The witness table is reserved for people who wish to testify. No video recording or photography is allowed from the witness table. Further, members of the public may not present audio or video recordings as testimony, but may submit transcripts of such recordings to the sergeant at arms for inclusion in the hearing record. If you wish to speak at today's hearing, please fill out an appearance card with the sergeant at arms and wait to be recognized. When recognized, you will have 2 minutes to speak on today's topic hearing, evaluating progress of reforms to accelerate nonprofit contract payments. Thank you. Our first panel will be John McIntosh, Michelle Jackson, Matt Jozowak, and Thara Docloso. Thara Ducloso from Nonprofit New York.
You can start when ready.
Good afternoon. Look at my watch. My name is Michelle Jackson. I'm the Executive Director of the Human Services Council. Thank you, Councilmember Juan. Thank you, Councilmember Stephen, and the Committee on Contracts for giving me this opportunity to testify today. As I start all my public remarks now, I have to really be, again, grateful for the cost of living adjustment and the workforce enhancement funding that was really championed by our council members here today, the council in general, and of course the administration. It's a huge win for human services workers, and just one piece of the pie of the work that we have left to do together. And I have to say that the shine can wear off very quickly of something like the cost of living adjustment when we worry about how it will be implemented. Nonprofits want to know about COLA implementation. That is coming along. And I tell them, if you get the workforce enhancement funding, you probably get the COLA. And our providers say, well, I haven't received my workforce enhancement funding from the last 2 years. And by the way, I haven't gotten my indirect funding from 4 to 5 years ago, and suddenly I'm very nervous about the state of New York and contracting. I want to be very clear that Lisa Flores is the right person to be captaining MOX. Her team is incredible. The deputy mayors are completely understanding of nonprofit issues. This is decades of disinterest and divestment in procurement in general and in nonprofits that bring us here today. And I have to really be clear that if procurement process doesn't become an almost singular focus of this city, all of the initiatives, all of the council's bills that are here today, all of the initiatives that are championed across the aisle really don't go anywhere unless their contracts are registered and paid. The MOX budget cuts are very concerning to us, while small in scale, compared to the city of New York. I think, Chair Wan, you kind of illuminated those cuts, but going from an overall budget cut with $13.5 million, when we look at all the contracting actions that we see today, makes us very nervous. I will not steal John McIntosh's thunder, but he has the data. Well, I like to let him do the numbers. That's not my specialty. But I think what he will illuminate is that we are seeing thousands of contract actions that are not complete, that are years old. Nonprofits do have to take lines of credit, or they're just not paying people and kind of bouncing vendors back and forth, to try to make ends meet, often mirroring the clients that they serve. And we need to see real change and a hyper focus on making Passport better. Passport is a good system. We shouldn't change it, but we should enhance it. And MOX has to be staffed, and so we would certainly push back against these budget cuts to ensure that MOX has the capacity to do what they need to do. And I just want to end by saying 3 things. The council has a lot of great bills here today. In my written testimony, we have our support for those bills. And so I would just say none of these bills matter if MOX isn't funded appropriately in this budget. So the council really has to ensure that they are pushing, and I appreciate the chairs pushing on that. The council should also focus on a few key items. There's a lot of legislation that's all good. And the key item for the nonprofit sector and my membership is timeframes and interest. This is the 3rd administration where we're waiting for data to tell us what the timeframes could be. Let's just have timeframes already and say 60 days to register, interest if you're late, and see what that new world would look like. So I'm happy to take questions, and you'll hear a lot more from our peers about kind of the particular issues that they face when contracts are not registered on time. And thank you for this opportunity.
Okay, we're kind of being hurried out because apparently there's another hearing at 1.
Oh, wow. All right.
What hearing is next at 1? Okay, they're okay. Okay.
All right.
you
I'll
can
be
talk.
super quick. I'm John McIntosh from Sea Change, Chair Wan and members of the committee. Thanks for the opportunity to testify. I'll have a lot more data in my written testimony, but just a few things. The pain from late registration and payment is real. We talk to nonprofits all the time who would love to be in the position of being able to borrow money and just worried about the interest rate. They're not even in that position. They're worried about, can they make payroll? Will they have to furlough their staff? I think if you said to nonprofits in the city, what's the single biggest source of mental health stress for you, they would say procurement with the city, number 1. Number 2, the people you've got are great. I've been in and around procurement for 15 years. I think Brad Lander, Sheena Wright, Lisa Flores, Jess Danhauser, the list goes on and on. They understand the problem. So why is it not solved? Number 3, I think you need to separate rules and regulations, technology platform, and people. The rules and regulations that we work under all date from 1989 and Donald Maness, Queens man, and that scandal. And so we have a system that is was built in reaction to a scandal with for-profits, is overwhelmingly geared towards reducing the appearance or the reality of corruption, efficiency and effectiveness be damned. And of course, it's not clear to me that it works. Look at Children's Community Services, $900 million, every I dotted, every T crossed. So I think we need to burn a lot of the procedures down, because things like Passport are just putting in a better technological situation the same old rules. Number 3, we have made a lot of progress in 10 years. We used to send printed copies in triplicate in vans rented for the purpose. Agencies had no standardization. There was no 25% advance, and I think the administration has continued some of those good things with the 3-year discretionary approvals and the 25% allowance. So I think we need to acknowledge progress has been made, but there are still problems. I'll be 30 seconds. So as Lisa Flores said, I think you have to separate discretionary items from everything else. But as of last month, and we ran the numbers, 86% of human service contracts starting in fiscal 24 were late. In fairness, that's 100% of discretionary items and like 71% of everything else. And as of May 1st, you still had 80% of the discretionary items unregistered and 19% of the non-discretionary items. And our rough estimate is that nonprofits, for contracts that have not been registered or late payments for registered contracts, are at about $800 million. Last two things. Marla Simpson's estimate was that there were like 3,000 or 4,000 people involved in procurement. How you manage those people really matters a lot, because the truth is, eventually contracts get registered. Eventually bills get paid. The notion that we don't have enough people is just not true on its face, because if you didn't have enough people to do the work, the unregistered contract would grow to the sky, the unpaid bills would grow to the sky. That's not what happens. Eventually they get paid. Eventually they get registered. It's just that procurement isn't sexy. People slack off, and they need to be actively managed, which is the last thing, which is why we announced Contract Stat. Now, of course, we took the name that the city was using just to get your attention, which worked. All we're trying to do is take the already public data and make it a little more usable. But I think the city could do some small things to add to Passport Public and Checkbook NYC to allow people like us to see better what's going on, because the last point I'd make is nonprofits will never be able to speak truth to power. They just won't. But I think if you make data available to folks like us, we can analyze it, we can play it back, and we can be an ally to Lisa and others who are trying to do the right thing but are fighting against 30 years of history. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, no worries. I'll be extremely brief, but I just want to thank Councilmember Juan for your oversight and advocacy, and all the council members that helped supported Rethink's work, and echoing the rest of my colleagues here saying that, Commissioner Flores' work and dedication, it seems that, everybody is aligned and moving in the right direction. We're here for one sole reason, which is to, in support of Intro 802, which would require the city to establish insurance policy that would be mandatory for all food procurement vendors contracting with city agencies. We've been hyper-focused on getting the local and small businesses involved in government procurement, and these very, very, very large and often unnecessary insurance policies are severely hindering our small businesses in the neighborhoods that are near these shelters from being involved in the procurement process.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Tara Ducosel. I am the Policy and Advocacy Coordinator at Nonprofit New York. Nonprofit New York represents almost 1,000 nonprofit member organizations across New York City, working to strengthen and unite New York's nonprofits. In the fall, we launched the Y15 Budget Advocacy Campaign following the administration's 15% across-the-board budget cut directive. The campaign continues to seek full restorations to nonprofit service cuts, greater transparency on the budget cut rationale, and the nonprofit inclusion in the city's budget process. Throughout our campaign meetings, the most pervasive and persistent concerns voiced by members include an urgent need for government contracts reform. Members have shared how they've not been paid for work they've done 2 years ago, and many members shared that they've been doing work since the beginning of this fiscal year with no payment from the city. We recently administered a government contract survey to assess the impact of contracting delays to nonprofits, with organizations reporting that they're hesitant to share that they can't even get their amended contract registered due to fear of reprisal, continued passport technical challenges contributing to further delays in their contracts, and overwhelming bureaucratic processes for award amounts as small as $5,000 to $10,000, which are often reimbursements for services they've already rendered. As a result of these delays across all subsectors, nonprofits have had challenges making payroll, rent. They've had to lay off staff, delay paying the executive directors for months, and have lost talented development staff. Moreover, we know that contracting delays have a distinct and disproportionately harmful impact on small, BIPOC-led, culturally and linguistically specific organizations. These persistent delays have significantly negative impacts on organizational operations and adversely affect the livelihoods of nonprofit workers and the services that the city relies on. At Nonprofit New York, we asked the city to hold an oversight hearing on the status of the recommendations from A Better Contract for New York and invite all nonprofits experiencing contract delays to testify. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, we'll review all the written contracts. Thank you so much. The next panel is going to be Nicole McVuna, Nora Morin, Pascale Leon, and Lily Shapiro. Thank you.
Thanks. Hello, can you hear me now? Okay, great. Good afternoon, Chair Wan and members of the Committee on Contracts. Thanks for the opportunity to testify this afternoon, as well as their important and critical series of questions that you guys asked this morning. My name is Pascale Leon. I'm the Executive Director of the Supportive Housing Network of New York. We're a membership organization that represents nonprofit developers and operators of supportive housing. I'm honored to be joined by several of them today, including our board chair, Brenda Rosen of Breaking Ground. And so I have to thank the council for your tremendous support this fiscal year in pushing back against those disastrous pegs, as well as the implementation of a 3-year COLA for our much-deserved workforce, as well as notably for supporting our New York City 1515 reallocation plan for the city to really boldly meet the city's homelessness and affordable housing crisis head on and meet the commitment to create 15,000 new homes. But today I want to highlight, like everyone here, the impacts of the late contracts and the challenges with passport implementation. The fact that nonprofits we represent are wait years to the tunes of tens of millions of dollars to be reimbursed from the city, forcing them to take out really costly loans, paying hundreds of thousands in interest fees to cover salaries and expenses. I can't think of another sector this would happen to aside from mission-driven nonprofits. And so we really appreciate the slew of bills that have been introduced. We are very supportive of Intro 514, which will require the interest to be paid on late payments to nonprofits, but we'd like to see that go further. The fact that the city needs to enforce a standardized contract advance solution that allows providers to claim up to 75% of their budgets while waiting payments. What we heard from Mox earlier in that $7.2 million cut, that will have real injurious impact on providers. And currently there's really no uniformity or consistency among the agencies as how advances are doled out. We're also supportive of Intro 508, which calls for greater transparency and accountability. If I have just 30 more seconds, by requiring reporting and interest payments. And we believe there are some improvements you'll see in my testimony, the bills that we also support, and changes to passport that need to be made. Lastly, I just want to say flat out, the indirect cost rate initiative is failing. Outdated ISRs are being used, new rates are not included in budgets, and a host of other challenges are causing delays. Providers need to have this minimum of 20% ICR reimbursement, as Intro 243 represents. We have members are telling us that that 22% or 25% of their overall budget is pending reimbursement and lacking sufficient overhead, and really worry about the impact this will have on tenants, on staff, and the proper maintenance of these buildings. And so really representing the true cost of doing business. And so we appreciate your support, and I look forward to collaborating. Happy to answer any questions, but I will turn over to my colleagues here who really dive into the data, the sobering data that illustrates the real picture of what they're facing here.
Hi. Good afternoon, Chair Wan and members of the council. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Brenda Rosen, and I am the president and CEO of Breaking Ground, New York City's largest developer and operator of supportive housing for low-income and chronically homeless New Yorkers. We operate more than 4,500 units of permanent and transitional housing, with over 2,000 more in various stages of development. We also operate the street outreach programs in Brooklyn, Queens, and Midtown Manhattan, which connects the most entrenched long-term homeless individuals with housing and other critical support services. Today, I'm here to discuss how contracting and payment delays are straining Breaking Ground's liquidity and increasing financing costs. As of today, we are owed $23 million by the Department of Homeless Services. This includes $12 million pending repayments from invoices submitted to Passport. Further, budget modifications cannot be processed in the new system, which prevents us from submitting invoices for previously approved 65A forms, indirect cost rates, and contract amendments, totaling $11 million. 80% of these receivables are over 90 days past due. Many date back as far as 2020. During 2023, we paid $830,000 in unreimbursed interest expense on our lines of credit, and we continue to pay $90,000 per month in 2024. This is a 660% increase compared to 2020, when unreimbursed interest expenses were $109,000 for the entire year. Based on these delays, we are in a constant struggle to meet payroll, to keep vendors paid and prevent them from walking off the job, and to meet financial covenants in loan agreements. Given the growing financial risk of doing business with the city, we are fearful of taking on additional contracts to help thousands more unsheltered New Yorkers find homes. Thank you so much for your continued support and the opportunity to testify.
Thank you so much for testifying. For all the nonprofits that are here, if you have your business card, do you mind leaving it for me right here so that I can follow up with specific questions?
Good afternoon, Chair Wan. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Lily Shapiro, and I am Policy Counsel. I am Policy Counsel of the Fortune Society's David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy. In fiscal year 2023, we served over 11,000 people across our many programs, including housing over 1,000 people. And we now have over 500 employees working across 4 boroughs. We are proud to say that we hire our mission, as many of our staff, including our leadership, were involved in the criminal legal system, including having been incarcerated and or are in recovery, and many of our colleagues, my colleagues, began their journeys with us as participants. The breadth and depth of our growing impact is contingent upon our government funding, as well over half of Fortune's funding comes from the city. We appreciate the critical steps this administration and City Council have taken to recognize the importance of the nonprofit field and workforce, notably in agreeing to the long overdue cost of living adjustment. We thank council members for introducing the suite of bills before you today that I referenced more in my written testimony, but more is needed. And in our experience, late execution of contracts is the biggest cause of delay in recouping payment for services already provided, as we cannot invoice against a contract or a contract amendment that has not yet been executed and then registered. At any given time, Fortune has millions of dollars incurred in out-of-pocket expenses for service provision for which we cannot seek reimbursement because the governing contracts or amendments have not yet been executed. And one category for which we have repeatedly seen notable and lengthy delays in execution is actually the discretionary funding awarded by the council that flows through city agencies. These awards are critical to us and other nonprofits because they allow us to supplement our programs in innovative, nimble ways that are responsive to the needs of the people we serve, but are not covered by other funding sources. It is not unheard of for us to wait for over a year for one of these contracts to be executed, during which time we implement the contemplated programming at a cost. I'll be 30 more seconds. In the face of these delays, to be able to offer services, pay our staff, and keep the lights on, we are forced to draw on our line of credit, which costs us 8 to 9% interest. We also constantly fundraise for unrestricted dollars, which are extremely hard to obtain, and we know we're very fortunate to have these options despite the associated costs, and that our smaller fellow nonprofits face even greater challenges, which is both patently unfair and stifles innovation. We also do not take our position for granted because, as we saw with the deeply upsetting collapse of Sheltering Arms last year, no nonprofit organization is too big to fail. So we thank you for your attention to this critical matter, and we stand ready as always to partner with the council and the administration to work better together to most effectively serve our participants and enhance the well-being of the city. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Wan. My name is Nicole McVinue. I'm the Director of Policy at Urban Pathways, a nonprofit homeless services and supportive housing provider serving over 2,400 single adults annually. We hold city contracts with DHS, DOHMH, and HRA. Late payments continue to be a concern for our organization and the human services sector. Urban Pathways is currently owed approximately $3.9 million from the city on our DHS and DOHMH contracts. While most of these payment delays are due to the inability to submit invoices during the migration from HHS Accelerator to Passport, some of the DHS funds, as previously referenced, owed are also due in delays to getting budget modifications approved. Also included in this number is $500,000 owed for FY23 subcontractor reimbursements, for which we have been unable to bill due to delays in migrating FY23 information into Passport. We've paid this money out to our vendors already, but have not been able to receive reimbursement. We are further owed an additional $1 million for a single HRA contract that we have been unable to bill for due to a lack of clarity from HRA staff about what they want or need to process our invoices. The confusion has put the processing of invoices at a complete standstill. Additionally, there have been major delays in receiving the Workforce Enhancement Initiative funding for FY24. While we appreciate the mayor's investment in the workforce, we are just now receiving the notification of our FY24 funding amount alongside our notice for FY25. The nearly year-long delay and a lack of transparency in the formula used to calculate the funding has made it very difficult to administer the increase. These payment delays have and continue to cause a strain on our overall organizational budget, and it's imperative that the city catch up on the payment backlog. In light of these delays, it's very concerning to see the steep cuts proposed to MOX in the FY25 budget, and we want to make sure that MOX is fully funded and fully operational. And in my written testimony, I have comments about the bills as well. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Nora Moran, the Director of Policy and Advocacy at United Neighborhood Houses. We represent New York City settlement houses. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify, for holding a hearing on this very important topic. Want to echo the comments made by providers here and the panel before about a lot of the challenges that organizations are seeing in the transition to Passport. We know it was necessary, doesn't mean it's not painful, doesn't mean it couldn't be better, and it really does feel like with a lot of the payment delays, a frail sector is being made even more frail and put under more stress. Our written testimony goes into more detail, but wanted to specifically talk about one of the bills, Intro 514, which would require interest to be paid on late payments made by the city. We feel this bill would be a really important step in order for the city to actually change its behavior. There have to be consequences when they don't behave in the way that they need to. We think that a financial penalty is one way to address that. This practice is already in place at the state level, so it's not a new concept. There's precedent for it. One thing we wanted to flag at how this works out at the state level, is that, there is a provision that the state has for a state agency and a provider to mutually agree to waive the right to interest. And the way we see that playing out is that providers basically say, well, we won't pursue interest if the state was late to register my contract because we're afraid of antagonizing a state agency and we just want to kind of get this over with. And so we want to make sure that, if Intro 514 does pass, that it's as strong as possible, right? That the funding to pay those penalties does not come out of service budgets and does not come out of the contract bottom line, and New Yorkers don't suffer because payments are late, and that agencies don't have a way to sort of get out of paying this penalty because we fear that, the late payments will not be addressed if that were the case. Thank you.
The next panel is Paula Magnus, Kristen Miller, Marlo Williams, Joseph Rosenberg. Thank you.
I'll just start. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Chair Wan. I'm Joseph Rosenberg, Director of the Catholic Community Relations Council. For well over a century, Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of New York and the Diocese of Brooklyn and Queens have been serving the basic needs of New Yorkers, not only in times of crises such as Superstorm Sandy and the COVID-19 pandemic, but every day of every year. Both charities and their affiliates touch the lives of countless New Yorkers, including families, children, the elderly, the disabled, and asylum seekers. Our strong partnership with city government in this mission has been a constant over these decades of service. We thank you for the COLA agreement. This is a remarkable achievement which will benefit tens of thousands of nonprofit human service workers. Despite this significant accomplishment, much work remains to be done. This is why we support the passage of several bills on today's agenda. Human service contracts awarded to nonprofits do not cover the true cost of providing services. Underfunded government payment rates are the main driver of financial distress, and the nonprofit human service sector has been experiencing this situation for decades. As a result, we are often left with budget deficits that cannot be filled by private grants or reserves. Intro 243 would require indirect costs to be covered in contracts awarded to nonprofits by city agencies. These costs cover such items as utilities, general liability, property insurance, custodial, and cleaning services. These services have been subject to COVID-induced cost increases over the last 4 years, followed by inflation, and all are essential to providing services to our clients. Intro 514 would address the financial shortfalls that nonprofit service agencies face upon being awarded contracts, but not promptly receiving the funds needed to cover these services. It would allow nonprofits to receive interest payments calculated from when the amount was to be paid. So if a contract was awarded on July 1st, but the funds to provide the services are not received until December 15th, the nonprofit would receive interest payments from July 1st. This is essential to help remedying the precarious financial situation faced by many of us who are awarded contracts but not the promised payments. And just finally, Intro 508 requires the PPP to create a system for city service agencies to provide nonprofit providers with info about why their contract payments are late. This would not only inform us about the timing of these contract payments, it would hopefully prompt city agencies to explore and formulate more efficient systems for delivering these funds. Thank you for your attention to the subject and to all the bills on this agenda.
Hi. Good afternoon. My name is Kristen Miller, and I'm Executive Director of Homeless Services United. We are a member organization for shelter and homeless service providers across New York City. Thank you, Chair Wong and members of the committee for allowing me to testify today. We are very appreciative of your ongoing leadership and dedication to ensuring that nonprofit contracted homeless service providers are able to be good fiscal stewards of critical life-saving services for New Yorkers, and especially your recent COLA support. that will impact thousands and thousands of our staff. As we've testified before you before, our member organizations are owed hundreds of millions of dollars by DHS, with individual nonprofits being owed anywhere from $700,000 to $31 million, resulting in them having to take out loans and paying high interest. Thank you for your ongoing attention to helping us get paid in full and on time. As we've been hearing, improvements have been made, particularly around contract registration, but as you know well, this is only the first hurdle in actually getting paid. Commissioner Parks testified previously that the majority of the fiscal year DHS contracts money has been allocated, but providers cannot bill for those dollars until their line item budgets are reviewed and approved by multiple levels within DHS, DSS, DS, and MOX. As John said earlier, we're working under a process whereby it seems we are guilty until proven innocent. The critical to, what we would like to see is that DHS or other city agencies undergo a corrective action plan, just as we are often told to do. And such a plan would include concrete timelines, deadlines, and full transparency. And I'll finish up here, the fiscal year 25 COLA guidance has just come out from the agencies, which is good, but unfortunately means that we'll be starting this fiscal year yet again behind the 8 ball, having to submit amendments prior to being able to invoice. That goes through the long approval process. Same thing with the workforce enhancement monies. This information keeps coming down very late. As Director Flores said, they are committed to working with us to get these in their budgets, but this requires one-off attention. We're grateful for the one-off attention, but there are hundreds of nonprofits and MOX is short-staffed. So finally, we encourage you to really push that the city MOX get its full budget allocation for staff and OTPS. The city pays its other vendors, it pays its bills on time, but it's somehow not able to pay its nonprofits on time. We can no longer afford this to happen. We also, as an aside here, we did make comments on the specific bills and again, appreciate your ongoing attention. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Chair Wan and Committee. My name is Paula Magnus, the Deputy Director of Northside Center for Child Development. We want to thank you for your ongoing effort, you and the committee, to diligent focus on the speeding up of the contract payments to vendors who serve at-risk individuals throughout New York City. Northside is a 78-year-old behavioral health clinic and school serving 700 children a day in 3 boroughs. Northside has approximately $15 million in contract with 5 city agencies. And based on our experience, Northside strongly encourages the council to pass all the legislative being considered here today. We also want to make 2 suggestions to increase the speed of the payment to vendors and reduce the workload and Passport by city agency staff and vendors. Our first suggestion is that MOX improve Passport, which they've been doing quite a bit of work there, but so that it doesn't block alerts that are augmented to provide information about what additional documents might need to be added or what steps need to be taken by vendors or the city to move contracts along. So remove that blockage there. Our second suggestion is that 15 corporate level documents listed in this written testimony should only be loaded to the vendor profile and Passport one time, so all other agencies can go and pull those documentations versus us going to all the different agencies. Vendors should not have to upload all these contracts over and over again. And once the city agency reviews and approves those documents, staff at other city agencies can pull that information and review it and move it forward. So centralizing that is very important to upgrade for Passport. Again, we recommend all be move forward. You've heard a lot about all the issues, and it's interesting when we hear staff as to what they're doing. It seems to be very different than what we're experiencing. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Chair Wan and esteemed members of the committee. I am Marlon Williams, Vice President of Public Policy and Collaboration at Philanthropy New York. We strongly support the proposed reforms that accelerate nonprofit contract payments, making the contracting process more efficient and accountable. Above all, however, we support investments in the Mayor's Office of Contract Services' sustained capacity to implement the current reforms and policies that are already in place. These changes are vital to ensuring nonprofits have the resources needed to deliver critical services effectively and reinforce their role as a cornerstone for a strong New York. Philanthropy New York, along with partners like Human Services Council and Nonprofit New York, have a long history of collaborating with the city to strengthen the nonprofit ecosystem. We applaud the City Council's recent efforts to reverse disinvestments in human services workers by securing a COLA, which we're all excited about. However, without the proposed reforms and departmental funding, these enhancements might never actually make it to the groups who need them. PNY is a membership organization with about 300 grant makers who invest about $3 billion annually in New York. Through our policy work, we actively work to ensure that there is a thriving nonprofit ecosystem. Our goal is for an effective balance between philanthropic dollars, which support core infrastructure and innovation, while government dollars cover the essential services that New Yorkers need. Knowing that philanthropic dollars alone cannot fill the gap left by the public sector, we partner with the city and critically mocks to ensure that nonprofits receive the resources they need to provide essential services to New Yorkers. Delays in payments and stalled contracts have severely impacted nonprofits by forcing them to implement layoffs, reduce wages, or cut essential services. Over the past 3 years, PNY has served as a critical convener of the city, nonprofits, and the philanthropic community to have critical conversations on these issues. The insights from this work informs why we are here today, passionately advocating for these actions that strengthen the contracting process for our nonprofit partners. Timely contract registration and payments are critical for organizational success and the fundamental government obligations that they represent. We urge the city to restore proposed cuts to MOCs and prioritize policies that enhance the contracting process, ensuring that nonprofits are paid in full, on time, and create a more equitable and efficient system that serves New Yorkers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Then if you have your business card, I know I already have your phone number. If you could leave it, I'll make sure that you have my contact as well. Next, we have Shani Ades from NILAG, Greg Clem from Legal Services New York City, Kendi Rainwater, Legal Services, the Legal Aid Society, Maximus Barton, Labor Local 1010.
Good afternoon, I think, at this point. Thank you for having us. I'm Kendi Rainwater, the Deputy COO at the Legal Aid Society, and we are here providing joint testimony as legal service providers here in the city. Collectively, we provide constitutionally and statutorily mandated legal representation to hundreds and thousands of New Yorkers each year. We employ thousands of dedicated staff to defend people against incarceration, deportation, eviction, and family separation. We connect people to life-saving benefits, housing, food, job training, substance and mental health support, and educational opportunities. We truly are a lifeline for low-income New Yorkers. We are grateful to the Council for your ongoing commitment to our work, including efforts like the bills presented today to bring greater speed and transparency to the procurement process and payment process. As you know, the city's system of funding and contracting with nonprofits is broken, but we do believe it can be fixed. I'm going to speak specifically about the indirect cost rate intro 243. So this is to increase the de minimis indirect cost rate to 20%, which would be extraordinarily helpful. The indirect cost rate, known as ICR, provides critical funding to cover essential administrative costs that nonprofits need to keep operations running. Currently, nonprofits must go through an extensive application process every 3 years to secure an indirect cost rate above 10%. But even once approved, rates above 10% are then funded through an extremely complicated and unclear process that involves agencies and MOCs, often following different methodologies from agency to agency and from year to year, creating confusion about which costs should be covered by which party, and significantly impacts our ability to project and plan for how we'd use that funding. As a result, the amount of indirect funding a nonprofit received is often confirmed very late in the fiscal year, or even worse, months after the fiscal year ended, almost finished. For example, several of us received confirmation of our FY23 indirect cost rate funding on critical contracts 6 months after the fiscal year ended, and we are still waiting for confirmed indirect cost rates for our current contracts in FY24. For anyone who's counting, there's 1 month left in this fiscal year. So increasing this to 20% would be extremely helpful, creating uniformity, but we also would advocate that we get a 50% of the ICR initiative on our base contracts as a part of the advance, instead of having to go through this process with MOCs. So we'll hand it over to the rest of the panelists. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Chair Wan, for the opportunity to testify. My name is Shani Ades, and I'm a Vice President with New York Legal Assistance Group, and I'm here with my co-panelists testifying on behalf of legal service providers. I'm going to be focusing my testimony on the significant challenges legal service providers face due to not being timely paid on our contracts. As you've heard, our ability to continue to operate and provide the high-quality advocacy for our clients, hire and retain staff, and respond to the ever-increasing need in the community is all threatened by late payments. Late payments on contracts create cash flow issues affecting our ability to continue to provide these services. Effectively, late payments cut our grants as we incur costs related to loans and banking fees. We appreciate the Council's goals to both standardize timely payments of contracts and require agencies to track and report their performance against this standard through the proposed legislation intros 508 and 514. Both of these intros begin tracking late payments from the date the invoice is received and accepted by the agency. While important and essential, delays create major issues for nonprofits much earlier in the process, from late contract registration, unnecessary cumbersome and changing processes for budget approvals and modifications, as well as invoice submission and review. Our written testimony has numerous recommendations to enable the spirit of the proposed legislations be fully realized, including standardizing timelines for each phase of the process, developing a dashboard that shares status info, streamlining invoice review and budget modification, and creating different levels of oversight and review. I do want to take one quick second to reflect that not only are organizations impacted by late payment, but so directly are our clients, and these are real and devastating impacts for our community members. Just one example, and more is in our written testimony, is that individuals who are at risk of eviction, who may be eligible for City FEP's renter vouchers, are sometimes unable to obtain these timely and therefore face eviction or have to go into shelter as a result of this. That's because vouchers are often obtained by going through a nonprofit home-based provider, but when cities fail to timely pay these nonprofits, they're not sufficiently staffed, resulting, I just have 10 more seconds here, resulting in delays in every borough in the city, ranging from months to a full year for an individual to even get an appointment to start this process. The delays cause people to end up in shelters unnecessarily, even though the city council has appropriated funds intended to prevent precisely this outcome.
Good afternoon, Chair Wan and members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to testify. My name is Greg Clem. I am the Chief Financial Officer at Legal Services NYC, and I will be speaking specifically about bridge loans, as well as some of the other recommendations that we have in our written testimony. Regarding Intro 510, we are pleased that it would create a requirement for city agencies to issue bridge loans for contractors like ourselves. Bridge loans can be lifelines for our organizations to cover staff and other expenses that we incur to deliver critical legal services to New York residents. However, this legislation scope should not be limited to contracts less than $500,000. The need for bridge loans is even greater for larger contracts. The greater the size of the contracts, the more staff salaries and expenses we must cover while waiting for contracts to be registered and invoices processed. Accordingly, we ask that this proposed legislation be expanded beyond its current scope and be applied to all of the city's nonprofit service contracts. In addition to these recommendations, we also recommend the following. Increase the standard advance at the beginning of the fiscal year from 25% to 50% to address delays in the invoicing process. Implement longer contract terms for baseline contracts, and also to require the city to cover the interest incurred on a loan or a line of credit, or allow organizations to invoice the city for those expenses as part of their contracts. Specifically, at the organization I represent, Legal Services NYC, we have incurred $80,000 in interest expense since the beginning of January. There are a number of other recommendations that we have as well, which we have included in our submitted written testimony. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
My name is Max Barton, and I'm a researcher for Lyono Local 1010 Paving and Road Building Union in New York City. Our members work together to build streets, bridges, and highways throughout the 5 boroughs of New York City. Local 1010 is an affiliate of the New York State Laborers, representing over 40,000 men and women across the state. I'd like to thank committee chair and lead sponsor, Councilmember Julie Wan, for holding this important committee hearing. I'm here to share Local 1010 support for Intro 803, along with over a dozen unions and community groups who strongly support this legislation. This bill would require the Procurement Policy Board to allow vendors and/or their designated representatives to protest procurement decisions made by a city agency. We urge the council and administration to pass the legislation without delay to increase public confidence in New York City's public procurement procedures. We believe that procurement decisions made by government agencies have significant implications for taxpayers, businesses, and the overall economy. It is crucial that these decisions are made through transparent and competitive processes that ensures the best value for public funds. The proposed legislation provides a clear framework for protesting agency procurement decisions and ensuring that all stakeholders, including taxpayers and other parties, have the opportunity to voice their concerns and seek redress from any perceived injustices. Passing this legislation would allow contractors and vendors to designate a third party to protest bids on their behalf. Not every contractor or vendor has the time and the resources to do so, and by passing this legislation, it evens the playing field for everyone by allowing vendors to have an advocate, including unions or worker advocates, to object to potentially non-responsive bids. In the past, such objections were ignored by agencies, as there were no formal process in the PBB rules to allow a party other than the bidder or vendor to be heard. This refusal to hear objections meant that objections based on the contract or wage practices, refusal to maintain a city-required apprenticeship programs, or criminal indictments were not heard. By way of example, labor advocates were recently unable to object to procurements sought by an indicted contractor who sought extensive new contracts, even though it held near monopolistic work on tree planting and pruning work in the City Parks Department. And in that case, City Parks Department refused to process PBP objections filed by Lyono Local 1010 for the sole reason it was not a vendor within the meaning of New York City Procurement Policy Board, PBB, Rule Section 2-10A. The contractor was indicted for, and ultimately convicted of committing a major insurance fraud by misclassifying workers. We urge the council and administration to pass this legislation without delay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Audacia Ray from New York City Anti-Violence Project. Boggy Chin Chief from Share Cancer Support. Catherine Trapani, Volunteer of America, Greater New York. Sharon Brown. And Kate Tissus.
Good afternoon. My name is Audacia Ray. I take they, them pronouns, and I'm the Director of Community Organizing and Public Advocacy at the New York City Anti-Violence Project. In the written testimony, I have some longer stuff as well as a blog post that was published by Nonprofit Finance Fund yesterday that has some detailed recommendations around these issues. But I wanted to share some about what AVP has been facing through this contracts process. So we've been around 40 years, and we started providing services to LGBTQ people in the early 80s when the city was both unable and unwilling to support LGBT people who were survivors of violence. And that willingness has changed a lot. And now city funding makes up about 20% of our budget. In this past year, our budget for our city council funding was around $700,000 out of a total of $5 million budget. And this year, as we're looking at the next fiscal year, we're shrinking our budget to about $4 million because, not just because of city council funds, but because of a bunch of other issues around fundraising. And so I'll say that in a normal year, we can weather either contract delays or shortfalls in fundraising. That's private foundations and individual donors. And this year we're dealing with both, and that's made things really, really challenging. So this March we did a staff reduction. In April, partly due to the financial situation, our board of directors chose to fire our executive director. And since then, 6 more staff members have resigned and moved on from the organization, due largely to insecurities about what is going to happen with our funding situation, when are we going to get paid, are we going to be able to provide the services that we've promised to our community. So the written testimony has the exact dollar amounts of what we're still owed in contracting, but I just want to say that it's really putting AVP in peril. We're a small org compared to a lot of these other, especially housing services organizations, and to move from $5 million to $4 million and not know when we're going to get paid by the city puts us in peril, and it's something that we are thinking about and stressed about every single day.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Wan and council members. My name is Bong Hee Chi. I'm with Share Cancer Support. I'm the Vice President of Development. I started in January. I kind of walked into a lively and unstable situation at Share. Part of that was caused because there's a lot of questions. Share is primarily supported through private funding. Government funding is an area that Share has been kind of working to grow. Just to back up a little though, we provide support services, education, and mentoring navigation for individuals with breast and gynecologic cancers, that's uterine, cervical, and ovarian. And we also have a large population of metastatic disease survivors that we support. In addition to taking care of cancer survivors and patients, we also conduct a great deal of outreach and education, particularly to communities of color, targeting Black, Latina, and Asian women, because these are the most underrepresented and overlooked populations when it comes to cancer education and treatment services. We provide a lot of education around signs and symptoms, diagnosis, and provide a directory for free mammogram services, which is essential to many of our women, especially young women who don't have access to insurance coverage for mammograms, even though the incidence of cancer is rapidly increasing among young women. And when it does hit young women, it progresses very rapidly to late-stage disease and death. The impact of the delays in getting our contract registered, which for a small organization like Share, which also has like a $5 million operating budget and government funding makes up about 10%, is basically loss of staff and just 30 more seconds, layoffs and delays in hiring or, being able to conduct our business. And what that leads to is basically women who are not receiving the education in order to get timely mammograms. And that, many times we're seeing an increase as like from what happened with COVID, with women not accessing mammograms, is we're seeing a rise in number of women of color being diagnosed at late stage 4 breast cancer and gynecologic cancers. And so the impact of delays in getting our services out there is basically, late stage disease progression and death. So thank you very much for, considering all of these. We definitely want to support all of these initiatives, but especially around the timeline and interest, which would really be supportive to small organizations like ours.
Thank you so much. My name is Catherine Trapani. I am the Assistant Vice President of Public Policy at Volunteers of America, Greater New York. Very appreciative for you sticking with us through this long hearing. Sorry, I'm short. Thank you. In my written testimony, you will see a lot of detail. I sat with my finance team for over 2 hours getting their stories about the struggles that we have just doing routine business with the City of New York. You are always invited if you want to hear the details, but you have the distillation of that in our written testimony. The bottom line is that last year we spent around $700,000 on interest just on our city contract late payments alone, and the budget for this fiscal year, because we've been told not to expect much progress, frankly, in timely payment, that we are budgeting $1 million for FY25 just for interest. And so needless to say, we are eager to see a lot of efficiencies that were talked about at today's hearing. We have had a lot of issues with Passport, a lot of issues with adherence to cannot compete with that. With adherence to invoicing procedures at the city level, and payments are very, very often late. Just by way of example, the Department of Homeless Services typically has like 12 stages of review before they pay a single invoice to our providers. So it's really bad. I'd like to make a suggestion of a better way. If the City of New York would adopt the state's consolidated fiscal reporting model. This is a system whereby the state, once you enter into a contract with them for a service, they advance you 25%. You are allowed to draw down funds immediately as you need to in accordance with your budget. Then at the end of the quarter, you reconcile. If there's any discrepancies or clawbacks, there's an opportunity for ample review. And this process repeats on a quarterly basis. So you're getting 25% every single quarter, and you're not wondering whether or not you're going to be able to afford to operate your business. And so we're not saying no oversight. This is what the state of New York already does. And we think it would be much more efficient than the Byzantine rules that we have for invoicing now. And if you will indulge me, just on 514 with relation to the interest payments, certainly strongly support being able to bill for those, but we do want to echo something that Nora Moran said earlier in her testimony. Particularly as a shelter provider, I can't scale back services. And so if the money that I'm allowed to pay towards interest, if this bill were passed, has to come at the expense of program dollars, I'm still subsidizing the city because I can't cut services. There's nothing to cut. So the suggestion we would have to strengthen that bill would be to ensure that we don't have to borrow from program to pay what the city is forcing us to subsidize. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Hello, my name is Sharon Brown. Hi, Julie Wan, your contracts and committee counsel. How are you? Okay, I believe that the city should be prompt on their payments and things for contracts, and they should be paying for quality contracts. I think the problem that the city is not paying properly is because they're having so many problems from these agencies not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So I think they should stop contracts with anti-Semites, with the UNRWA, the LGBTQIA, and abortion. These things are seen as from a Judeo-Christian perspective, as amoral. And it seems that the government, New York City, has found a way to defund them by closure, by not paying these contracts. It's a simpler, easier way in order to go after all of these companies that are not fulfilling their obligations. For instance, the Department of Homeless Services, how long can you put people in shelters before you just say, straight to housing. There's 100,000 apartments open. Let's go to the apartment, get the apartment, pay for it, put you in it. If you need to call us, we'll give you a number. They can get funded that way. If you keep people in a congregate setting, people don't want to continue these services over and over. They're not helping anyone, so they're having problems with people of good conscience paying these contracts. It's not just we're bumbling, we don't know how to pay our bills. The city knows how to pay their bills. They're quite, up on finances. These places, not-for-profits or whatever they are not living up to what they're supposed to be doing. Not what they said they do, but what we need to be done.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody.
Sorry,
Oh,
one
okay.
more. Thank you, Chair Watton and other members of the committee for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Kate Tiskus. I work with Collective Public Affairs, and what I do is advocate for nonprofits, especially small nonprofits, that are wanting to participate in city funding and in the civic life of New York City generally. I'm here to testify in support of all of the measures that have been brought up today, and I want to especially note that I work with some of the initiatives like Trans Equity, like the Domestic Workers and Employers Empowerment Initiative, and one thing that's true is that those initiatives and New York City generally are stronger when we can work with hyper-local, teeny tiny nonprofits that are targeted towards specific communities. For example, language access, or nonprofits that are focused on specific sectors of community that are hard to reach in other ways. And those kinds of nonprofits, which are by design almost all of the people who I work with, are often first-timers with the city. They have a really hard time accessing the funding. Their budgets are much, much smaller even than $5 million a year operating usually. And navigating through the paperwork is so scary that I often have a hard time keeping them in city programs just because they're sort of like, I don't think we can do this. And the amount of time they have to spend with me getting through the system of registrations is pretty difficult and prohibitive. So all of these attempts to sort of cut down the amount of time and the amount of red tape and to provide some kind of transparency and accountability into the procedure are very, very helpful, especially for the hyper-localized services that my clients work hard to provide. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Next, we have our online testimonies. We have Arian Cruz, Jim Dill, Marilla McLean.
Arian, you may begin. Arian, you may begin.
Okay, Jim Dill.
Hello, I'm Jim Dill, Executive Director of Housing and Services, Inc. We are permanent supportive housing serving 715 households in both congregate and scattered site settings in Manhattan and the Bronx. We are members of the Supportive Housing Network in New York and support all the network's advocacy points for this hearing. First, we express our thanks to the Council for supporting the proposed reallocation of NYC 1515 resources and for instituting a COLA over the next 3 years for the human services sector. For reasons that will be described in our written testimony, we support the following bills: 02, 43, 0508, 0510, 0514, 0801. Our annual budget is approximately 17 million. Currently, we are owed $1,250,000 in outstanding New York City contracts dating back from FY23 to FY18. In addition, due to the precipitous migration of contract billing from Accelerated Passport, we currently have approximately $675,000 in FY24 billings, net of contract advances, that we are unable to bill as our funding agencies struggle through the backlog of unprocessed bills. The total stimulus approximates 11% of our annual budget and places us in financial peril. MOCs and our funding agencies are already desperately in need of more resources to work through contract backlogs, learn the new passport billing system, and to take on the additional but urgently needed transparency that the proposed legislation requires. We urge you to support more resources for MOCs and our funding agencies and the proposed legislation. We thank you very much for your time today, and thank you so much again for the COLA.
Marilla McLean.
You may begin.
Good morning. Can you confirm that you can hear me?
We hear you.
Thank you. Good morning. I am Mary McLean, Managing Director of Neighborhood Health Services for Public Health Solutions. To Committee Chair 1, I thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony regarding our experience as a recipient of discretionary funding. In 2022, PHS provided direct services to more than 125,000 New Yorkers. For several years, discretionary funding awards have supported our services through the following council initiative: the Maternal and Child Health Initiative, the Dedicated Contraception Fund, the Access Health, and the Support Our Seniors Initiative. The main challenge we face is delays in contract executions, which are routinely over 6 to 9 months, sometimes up to a year, despite PHS providing all required information on a timely basis. Delays in executions means that PHS does not get reimbursed in a timely manner, and it stifles our ability to provide innovative services. We have a few suggestions. 1, for the discretionary award tracker, more timely updates. 2, during the post-award process, reducing the number and types of forms recipients are required to complete. 3, adding point of contacts at MOCs to ensure our questions are answers. 4, reducing the number of transparency resolutions. And 5, ensuring fully executed contracts are available in their entirety through the passport systems. We see the need for both improved timing of contract registration and increased level of funding. In particular, PHS sexual and reproductive health centers are struggling due to funding costs in both the New York State and federal level. And I'm actually not in person today because of a federal audit and a site visit at our SRH centers. It is unlikely that without support, our centers will be able to continue to function. PHS requests support from the New York City Council to allocate $300,000
Your time has expired. Thank you.
in FY25. Thank you.
If there are no more testimonies, we are going to adjourn this Contracts Committee hearing. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the New York City Committee on Landmarks, Public Sightings, and Disposition. At this time, please place your phone on vibrate or silent mode. If you want to submit testimony, send it to testimony@council.nyc.gov. Once again, that's testimony@council.nyc.gov. At any time during this hearing, do not approach the desk. Thank you for your cooperation. Chair, we are ready to begin.
Good afternoon and welcome to the meeting of Subcommittee on Landmarks, Public Sightings, and Dispositions. I am Councilmember Camila Hanks, and I'm the chair of the subcommittee. I am joined today by my colleagues, Councilmember Brannan, Farias, Marte, Nurse, Salam, and Aviles. Before we begin today's agenda, I will remind everyone that this meeting is being held in a hybrid format. For members of the public who wish to testify remotely, we ask that you first register online, and you may do so now by visiting council.nyc/land use to sign up and then sign into the Zoom and remain signed in until you have testified. For anyone with us today in person wishing to testify, if you have not already done so, please see one of the sergeants to fill out a speaker's card, and we will call your name at the appropriate time. For anyone wishing to submit written testimony on the items being heard today, we ask that you please send it via email to landusetestimony@council.nyc.gov. Include the land use number and/or project name in the subject line of your email. Video and audio testimony will not be accepted. I will remind members of the public that this is a government proceeding and that decorum shall be observed at all times. As such, members of the public shall remain silent unless and until called to testify. The witness table is reserved for people who wish to testify. No video, recording, or photography is allowed from the witness table. Further, members of the public may not present audio or visual recordings as testimony, but may submit transcripts of such recordings to the sergeant for inclusion in the hearing record. Now I will open up the public hearing for LU 84 and 85, an application brought by multiple city agencies, Department of Transportation, Department of Design and Construction, Department of Citywide Administrative Services, and Department of Parks and Recreation for the acquisition of real property and changes to the city map to facilitate the Red Hook Coastal Resiliency Project, a project aimed at reducing flood risks along Brooklyn's Red Hook waterfront in Councilmember Aviles and Hanif's district. Protecting the climate against climate change is essential. This innovative project's flood protection system includes flood walls, deployable barriers, raised streets, and other infrastructure designed to mitigate coastal storm flooding. Importantly, the project achieves these goals while maintaining neighborhood connectivity and access to an active waterfront and ensuring minimal disruption to pedestrians, cyclists, and vehicles. Appearing today on this proposal, we have Eric. I'm sorry, can you say that?
Hi, Eric Ilyevich.
Ilyevich, thank you. And from the Department of Design and Construction, Beth DeFalco from the Department of Environmental Protection, and Joseph Meltzer from NV5. Those wishing to testify must register online by visiting the council's website at council.nyc/land use. Council, will you please administer the affirmation?
Panelists, would you please raise your right hand and state your name for the record?
Eric Ilyevich.
Joseph Menzer.
Thank you. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony before this subcommittee and in answer to all council member questions?
I do.
I do.
I do.
Thank you, applicant. Panelists, please begin.
Hi, good afternoon, council members and all. Thank you so much for your time today. Again, my name is Eric Ilyevich. I'm Director of Coastal Resiliency at the Department of Design and Construction. Thank you for your time today to look over the land use actions included in the ULURP for the Red Hook project, SANDRDHK. I'll just go through the agenda, which is on the next slide. So we're going to talk briefly about a very high-level project overview and schedule, talk about the existing conditions and how we hope to mitigate the flood risk, go through the design review, refresh folks on the environmental review, and then take a closer look at the land use actions in the ULURP, and then summarize and look at the next steps. So the next slide, please. This is for the project overview and schedule. And we can go right to the next slide, please. Thank you. So again, at a very high level, we're providing coastal flood protection, risk reduction, while maintaining the connection and access to the active waterfront, which we do with an entirely passive system at 8 feet. We have some deployable measures, but if we don't even deploy those, we'll have protection up to 8 feet. So we increase that level of protection to 10 feet by including those roller gates and flip-up gates, which will address 99.9% of historic storms in the Red Hook area. Throughout the design process, we were able to include improvements to open space by adding improvements to the BWG, or the Brooklyn Waterfront Greenway. The next slide will talk about the schedule. And just moving from top down, we are in the process of submitting our Public Design Commission project and for their review and approval. We're at the final stage of ULURP, which is again presenting to you all for your acknowledgement of the land use actions in our ULURP. Other than a brief break for COVID in 2021, we have met the community many times at the CBs, as well as in small group sessions, and we've also submitted the environmental assessment. Our next slide shows us a brief overview of how we, this is the actual milestones of the community engagement that we've had throughout the life of the project, going all the way back to 2016 and 2018 in feasibility, all the way up till now in final design and ULURP. Okay, the next slide, please. So we'll remind folks again about the flood protection alignment, and the next slide shows how we do that. This is an image of the project area, and then just looking from top down, there's a faint black dotted line, which is the natural topography at an elevation 10. So we tie into that with two sections of flood protection, both at the Atlantic Basin section, which is at the top of the screen, as well as the Beard Street section at the bottom. And those blue lines are the composition of both flood walls, flood gates, and raised streets and sidewalks for both of those areas. Components are tying back to high ground at 10 feet, elevation 10 feet, which is that black dotted line. So let's take a closer look at some of the actions, again, that are specific to this application. So the next slide. This is the land use composition. This is a picture which shows a whole host of different land use uses in different colors throughout the area with the alignment of the flood protection. And so this land use composition includes an active industrial waterfront with inland residential areas. There is a strip of mixed-use space between these two areas, including one-story warehouses to six-story multifamily buildings consisting of light manufacturing, artist studios, restaurants, and a host of varying local businesses. Some of the larger standouts that you can see here are the IKEA, as well as the Red Hook houses, which is the largest NYCHA development in Brooklyn, where there are 24 six-story buildings where about 70% of Red Hook's approximate 11,000 residents reside. Please also recognize that the vast majority of the waterfront is privately owned, except for only a few public waterfront access points, including the Valentino Pier and the waterfront esplanades at IKEA. This entire area is surrounded by navigable waters under a federal jurisdiction, and the handful of historic buildings, particularly along Beard Street, were originally designed and located to take advantage of their close proximity to a working waterfront and to facilitate all of the commerce and industry associated with that waterfront connection. This patchwork of ownership was the key driver for the final alignment of the flood protection system, and that is, again, indicated in the black line that you see here. The next slide, please. This is an image showing the different zoning areas in the Red Hook area. Medium to heavy manufacturing zones are mapped along the waterfront, with an M21 district along the neighborhood's western shoreline and an M31 district along the southeastern shoreline. A light industrial M11 zone was mapped to serve as a buffer between the industrial waterfront and the residential core of the neighborhood. Low to medium density residential zones with limited commercial overlays are located in the center of the neighborhood, and a local truck route wraps around the neighborhood on Van Brunt, Beard, and Bay Streets. The next slide, we take a look at some of the policy that affects the area. So this is an image, again, that shows the black line of the flood protection system, as well as some of these specific zoning areas, which I'll describe. The zoning has been consistent largely since 1961, but there have been some changes to note, including the following. In 1996, CB6 approved the 197A plan for Red Hook, which is the area outlined in the pink dotted line. The plan has two goals, which are essentially to increase housing supply and preserve the growing neighborhood's industrial economy. This plan also included a number of proposals, including a mixed zoning study, increased public waterfront access, and truck route modifications. Following the 197A plan, the Red Hook Stores rezoning area was mapped as one of the city's first mixed-use districts in 2002, as well as the IKEA rezoning in 2004. Also established in 2006, the majority of the Red Hook project is located within the Southwest Brooklyn Industrial Business Zone, or IBZ, which is shown in purple. And the IBZ spans Red Hook's industrial waterfront and extends to Columbia Waterfront District to the north and Sunset Park to the south. So let's take a look at the next slide, which shows the flood risk to the area. So a majority of the neighborhood shown here in the blue-green is the 1% annual chance flood hazard area, or the 100-year floodplain. And that means that every year there's a 1% chance of a 100-year flood in this area. And just one thing to note, that this area has an elevation generally from about 4 to 8 feet. And a reminder that that's what our system protects to just passively. The area in orange are the 0.2%, or the 500-year floodplain, which has a much lower risk of flooding due to the natural topography of the area with an elevation at around 10 feet. And again, that's the reminder of when we deploy our gates, we get to that level of 10 feet. So the next slide shows the actual flood protection components as part of our design review. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this dark blue line is the alignment of the concrete flood wall. It's very hard to see here, but there's a dark blue line there. The yellow and orange markers are the locations of the flip-up gates and roller gates, respectively.